Well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. This is going to be, I think, a very exciting afternoon in this team science workshop, and though I'm here as the PI of the CTSA to welcome you, this is really the brainchild of Rick Rudick and his team. My co-PI for the CTSA, who's been advancing team science at Case Western Reserve and its affiliated hospitals for the last 15 years or so. It's a very important topic for all of us. So for today, we have a series of 6 learning objectives, some of them fairly straightforward, and some of them that I think will engender some discussion and some engagement, or I hope it will. We need to define what we mean by team science and to understand the growth and impact of team science. I think this has been one of the more remarkable areas in academic medicine over the last dozen years, and I think we need to think about that in terms of how we do our own work. I think we have to learn that team science is not necessarily all smooth sailing, and understand the genesis and nature of conflict that can arise in team science. Team science relies upon trust, and we need to understand how to engender and how to foster trust. We need to understand the role of a leader in team science, and we need to be able to understand how we form teams and how we can achieve results. So from my personal point of view, and with contributions from my co-PI, Rick Rudick, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I think about team science. I think that research has become very complex and challenging, and we have selected now problems to work on that can only be solved by multidisciplinary approaches. Some of the problems that we need to address are complex and multifaceted, and the team approach may be the only way that we can make any headway. Teams do provide us with the opportunity to solve these problems and to make a difference for our patients. I also think that working in a team can expand our own individual vision of how we see our own work and what we do ourselves. And I think we have the chance to model our ideals for our trainees by forming effective teams. We've all talked about how important science is and self-correction. We've talked about the confluence of ideas. We've talked about how we need to work together to move forward. And as we form teams, we have the opportunity to model this for the next generation. We also have to figure out how to incentivize and reward team science because we feel it has great promise and great value. We also need to understand that a team is not a static entity, that teams form and reform according to the needs of the science. My colleagues in nanoparticles would say that they are sometimes self-assembling. The need for individual excellence and competence, however, will never go away, not in the context of team science, not anywhere. So each team member needs to maintain his or her individual excellence and competence in order to make a contribution to the team as a whole. The big problems are much too complex, and science has advanced along so many disciplines, requiring teams of investigators as opposed to individual efforts. Each individual investigator who has achieved a high level of excellence in his own right now brings something important to the team. And team science can be very much fun and rewarding, but you have to work at it. It doesn't happen by accident, and you have to make sure that you understand how to work at it to make it successful. This offers us the opportunity to make a big difference in the lives of our patients, so here we are. There are, in fact, barriers and challenges, but many of our faculty have overcome those challenges, and we can learn a lot from those who have done so. And we've assembled some of these folks today. So it also falls to me to say some of the thanks for this morning, for this afternoon, in advance of the program. First, thank you to Dr. Fiore, our keynote speaker, who is the director of the Cognitive Science Laboratory at the Institution for Simulation and Training and associate professor of cognitive sciences in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Central Florida. Looking forward to his contribution. Thank you to our speakers and our moderators, Dan Anker, Suzanne Brady-Calney, Joe Calabrese, Randy Siebel, Sambath Chung from Elsevier, I think everybody else is from Case Western Reserve, Mark Griswold, Vikas Gulani, Z.R. Liu, Shirley Moore, Rick Rudick, and Bob Salata. And I must say Shirley can't be with us today because of illness in the family, but Shirley has been one of the major proponents of team science at this institution, and we're certainly going to miss her. And thank you, too, to our Master of Ceremonies, Jim Spilsbury, who is the Program Director for the Academic Corps, the Center for Clinical Investigation at Case Western Reserve, an R01-funded investigator and a honcho of our educational program within the CTSA, which is arguably one of the most successful pieces of the CTSA. So I will turn the program now over to Jim and be very interested in the way it goes forward and in your contributions this afternoon. Jim?
Thank you, Dean Davis. I would first like to alert you to a change in today's schedule. As Dean Davis mentioned, Shirley Moore is unable to be with us today, so we will not have the team science course overview. But we will make sure the materials that she wanted to share with you are about her team science course are available on the CTSC website. And to accommodate this change, our keynote session will run to approximately 2:15, which will give a little more time for questions and answers. Dr. Chung's presentation will start a little earlier and run to 3, which will put us back on schedule. Our AV electronics experts have also asked me to make an announcement that during the course of these sessions, we'll have time for questions from the audience, and we'll have these portable microphones, and those work best if you hold them close to you. So they wanted me to add that. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Stephen Fiore. Dr. Fiore received his PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of Pittsburgh, and he is an associate professor of cognitive sciences in the University of Central Florida's Department of Philosophy. He also directs UCF's Cognitive Sciences Laboratory. His primary area of research is the interdisciplinary study of complex, collaborative problem solving. Dr. Fiore has taken a leading role on the national level in the development of the science of team science, serving on the National Research Council's Science of Team Science Committee, and he was instrumental in the founding of the annual Science of Team Science Conference. His presentation today is titled Team Science and Team Dynamics, Understanding the Theory and Practice of Collaboration in Science. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fiore.
Thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be here to provide you with kind of a 50,000 feet view of what's been going on in the development of the science of team science. I've been active in this area for a number of years. It arose out of my interest in studying teams more generally, but over the past decade or so, I realized that those of us who have been studying teams have ignored science teams. So we've been practicing science teamwork our entire lives, but we really hadn't looked at it as a focal area of study. And early on, about a decade ago, the National Cancer Institute started to pay attention to scientific teamwork. And what we've been trying to do is bring together scholars from different disciplines to try and create this area, the science of team science. And I'll be providing, again, this high-level perspective of what's been happening over the years to try and create this new movement, this new field. So I'll provide a little bit of background, but the way I've structured my talk is around these challenges that need to be overcome for effective scientific collaboration. So what do we mean by cross-disciplinary research? What do we mean by team science? How do you engage in teamwork in science? And how do you leverage the resources that have been developed over the years in pursuit of supporting team science? But first, some background. And I think it's important to recognize that this is an old issue, that is, collaboration across disciplines has been a problem for a number of years. In fact, many scholars of interdisciplinary research lay the problem squarely at the feet of Aristotle. So when the ancient Greeks started to ponder the natural world around them, they essentially began carving up nature at its joints. So they wanted to understand the phenomena around them, but what they did is they set in motion a chain of events that led to the modern university. That is, the fractionalization of disciplines based upon a particular area of inquiry. And this problem has not been lost on scholars. And Karl Popper, noted philosopher of science, he said back in the middle of the 20th century, he noted that disciplines are distinguished partly for historical reasons and reasons of administrative convenience, such as the organization of teaching and appointments. But all this classification and distinction is a comparatively unimportant and superficial affair. We are not students of some subject matter, but students of problems, and problems may cut across the borders of any subject matter or discipline. So those of you who have been doing interdisciplinary research, this is certainly going to be a quote that resonates with you, but it's a sad fact that many of us are still entrenched within our particular disciplines. But when we work on complex problems, the reality is we are trying to solve problems. We're not trying to understand disciplines. We're trying to use disciplines as the toolkit to solve problems, to better understand, to use the different conceptual and methodologic frameworks that come from different disciplinary perspectives and come to a richer understanding. The challenge, though, is that the universities have not been set up appropriately to support this. So Carl Sangerzer noted about a decade ago, he said, what's critical to realize is the way in which our universities have divided up the sciences does not reflect the way in which nature has divided up its problems. So succinctly stating what the problem is in the modern academy, that we are operating within an environment that doesn't necessarily support how you're supposed to do research across disciplines. Fortunately, a lot of people have been paying attention to it, so the CTSAs have specifically been developed to overcome these kinds of problems. So even though we've known about the challenges of interdisciplinary for a number of years, I'm hopeful that there will be change, and I think a number of you are also hopeful that there will be change. And I think there's three reasons that we can see change coming in the next decade or so with regard to developing a science of team science. First and foremost, there is this increased emphasis on collaborative research, much more so than we've seen before, where we're bringing together teams of researchers to solve complex problems. If you have not read this already, there was a paper published in 2007 in the journal Science. Ben Jones, Brian Wuchte, and Stefan Wuchte, and Brian Utsi looked at 50 years of publications, 20 million patents and publications, to see the increasing degree to which collaboration was influencing the production of knowledge. And they're able to show that regardless of disciplines, more and more teams were producing more and more knowledge, that is more and more publications, and not only were they producing more, they were producing more high-impact publications. So this was a fairly substantial analysis, and it was kind of a wake-up call for those in the policy community, and they started to pay more close attention to the funding of scientific collaborations for the reasons that it was having such an impact on the production of knowledge. But these are really necessary but not sufficient conditions for improving scientific teamwork. What I think is necessary to the higher degree is the fact that there has been a tremendous growth in the study of teams over the past 50 years. So scholars from a multitude of disciplines have created a scholarship of groups and teams. And I think that is this scholarship that's going to inform and improve scientific collaboration. And you see I've grabbed some of the logos from a subset of the organizations, professional associations, that have members that study groups and teams. So there's the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, coming out of departments of psychology, and they have members who study groups and teams. There's a National Communication Association that come out of the schools of communication, and they have scholars who study groups and teams. The Academy of Management has people from organizational behavior and people from management who study groups and teams. So these are essentially discipline-focused organizations that have membership that study groups and teams. There's also interdisciplinary organizations that try to bring people together that focus on a particular topic. So the International Association for Conflict Management brings together people from different disciplines to try and understand conflict and try and ameliorate the problems that conflict can produce. Computer-supported collaborative work is a field within computer science that has been developing technologies to support collaboration, and they've been having an annual conference for a number of years. And the Interdisciplinary Network for Group Research is an organization that was specifically founded to bring together researchers from all of these different disciplines so that we could have an annual conference for those of us who specifically study groups and teams and share our research and get a better understanding of what is happening across these different disciplines. And I submit that this is what's going to be the necessary and sufficient component that's going to help us develop the science of team science and improve scientific collaboration. Now, more specifically with the challenges that I'm going to speak to over the next few minutes, there's really this challenge with understanding what it means to collaborate across disciplines. So I'm going to provide some detail about that. I'm also going to talk about what it means to do team science. So this is a continuing question that arises, what do we mean by team science? And then I'm going to spend the bulk of my time discussing what it means to do teamwork in science by drawing on a subset of concepts and theories from the study of teams and illustrating how they can inform scientific teamwork. And I'm going to conclude by providing some insight into some of the resources that have been developed over the past few years in support of team science. So first and foremost, the challenge of understanding what it means to do research across disciplines. And I know many of you are familiar with this, but there's actually a body of literature on which you can draw where people have been trying to more specifically understand what we mean by cross-disciplinary research. And this is really a general term that's been developed to describe anytime you bring together people from different disciplines and you create a team that's going to contribute their own disciplinary expertise to solve a particular problem. And we refer to this as multi, inter, and transdisciplinary research. And as I mentioned, there is a fairly substantial body of literature where they're trying to understand what these distinctions mean for the purposes of better measurement and for the purposes of better education. So first and foremost is this idea of multidisciplinary research. And I want to note that about a decade ago, the National Academy of Sciences recognized that the term interdisciplinarity was being used more and more in the modern academy. So they put together a committee that produced this report called Facilitating Interdisciplinary Research. The reason being, just like we have the science of team science and the policy community recognized that they were funding science teams that didn't really understand if that money was being invested in the most effective ways, the National Academy of Science saw that interdisciplinary research was being funded and projects were being developed along these lines, but they, as scientists, they wanted to determine whether or not they really understood what we meant by interdisciplinary research. So this was kind of one of the first stepping off points for trying to get a handle on this concept. So I'm going to be providing some of the definitions that has come out of this area of work. So first is this idea of multidisciplinary research. So this is essentially a collaborative effort where a team is assembled to contribute their particular disciplinary expertise. And obviously they want to achieve some kind of broader analysis, an analysis they could not achieve had they been working separately. But a key distinction here is that in multidisciplinary teams, they still kind of work independently or sequentially. They come together periodically to try and share their findings or share their perspectives, but the contributions that are drawn from these different disciplines are complementary. And this is an important distinction that is in service of the particular objectives of the teamwork. They don't necessarily integrate their methods or concepts or theories. And a point that I think is important for researchers to understand is that when people work in multidisciplinary teams, they still remain firmly anchored in their home disciplines. So the concepts and methods of their home disciplines still maintain a core element of their self. And this is an area of a particularly interesting and important area of research. So when we talk about interdisciplinary research, what we're talking about is people starting to shed their identity of their particular disciplinary approach. When you do multidisciplinary research, you come together, you work together, you put your pieces into the puzzle, so to speak, but you still walk away. If you're a biologist working with a chemist, you still walk away as a biologist. If you're a psychologist working with a neuroscientist, you still walk away as a psychologist. You haven't necessarily lost your identity when you work in these kinds of projects. But we can step up a level of complexity and start talking about interdisciplinary research. So this demands more than just complementarity. What happens in interdisciplinary research is the teams are expected to combine and juxtapose particular methods, particular theories, and the specific definition that the National Academies identified had to do with this idea of integration. So they noted that in interdisciplinary research, the idea is to integrate information, data, techniques, tools, perspectives, concepts, or theories from two or more disciplines or bodies of specialized knowledge. So the goal here is to advance fundamental understanding and solve problems that are beyond the scope of a single discipline. But an important component of this is that interdisciplinary researchers start to shed their identity. So in fact, they can start to create an entirely new discipline. So you heard that my background was cognitive psychology, but I got bored with cognitive psychology and started collaborating early on with researchers from other fields, whether they be computer science, philosophy, neuroscience, and the field of cognitive science emerged along similar lines. So a few decades ago, researchers in neuroscience and in computer science and in psychology and philosophy all realized they had a similar interest in studying mind. And they said, you know, we should come together more often because I think we can inform our methods and our theories. And thus was born the Cognitive Science Society. And now there are PhD granting institutions specifically in cognitive science. And some say this is a hallmark of interdisciplinarity. That is, when people start to do this research together, they create a new discipline in and of itself. And this is what I mean by the sense of identity. You're starting to lose your identity. And this is very important for those of you in leadership positions, because if you are supporting people who are doing interdisciplinary research, what they're going to be doing is publishing outside their home departments, publishing outside their home fields. And this is a particular stumbling block when it comes to tenure review, because people often get penalized for publishing outside their area of research. And you really need to encourage and support this and not punish and penalize it, because essentially they're losing their identity as a chemist, for example, and they may be publishing in an engineering or physics journal because they're doing important, groundbreaking research that's contributing to multiple disciplines. So this is why I encourage people to pay attention to this notion of identity as scholars start to develop their own interdisciplinary areas of inquiry. And last, we have this notion of transdisciplinary research. This is essentially the modern buzzword. Interdisciplinary research was the buzzword back in the 90s, and now we talk more about transdisciplinary research. And we have the clinical and translational science centers. So this is a kind of a tough topic to wrap one's head around. So I've been talking to people over the years to get a succinct definition and distinction as to what we mean by transdisciplinary research. So these are really kind of the core elements that I think distinguish transdisciplinarity from interdisciplinarity. So first and foremost, it obviously has to hold on to this idea of integration. So you're going to integrate and build from discipline-specific theories and concepts. But an important part of transdisciplinary research is this idea of levels of analysis and pursuing understanding across levels of analysis. So you can you do research that has a micro level, a meso level, and a macro level. So you could be looking at very low levels of analysis, but also looking at high levels of analysis, such as the societal or behavioral levels of analysis. And the goal is to develop a more comprehensive understanding of a particular problem. And a key element is this notion of a focus on societal problems and the development of practical knowledge. So translational and transdisciplinary, what they're trying to do is solve real problems and translate those findings and apply them to the real world. Because of that, they have translational partners. And to me, this is one of the more exciting developments in teamwork research, that is the inclusion of non-experts on the teams. So you can have, for example, members of non-governmental organizations participating in these kinds of teams. You can have community partners. You can have government partners or industry partners. These are people who are contributing their own area of expertise, not necessarily scientific expertise, but the goal is to not only inform one's understanding of the problem, the goal is also to ensure a more rapid translation of the findings from that research to the real world. So with transdisciplinary research, we try to transcend disciplinary perspectives and enable the development and application of new methodologic and conceptual frameworks. So to wrap up this challenge, what it means to do research across disciplines, I think to overcome it, we really need to ensure that researchers who are engaged in cross-disciplinary research try to understand the problem they want to address. and based upon that, try and determine what kind of research is necessary to solve that problem. We don't want to privilege one form of cross-disciplinary research over the another. Sometimes it might be appropriate to do multidisciplinary research, or you might need to do interdisciplinary, you might need to do transdisciplinary research. Just because your dean or your provost says we want to do interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research doesn't mean you should do it. It may be that the state of the science isn't ready to contribute to that kind of research program. You may need to still do multidisciplinary research. So tailor the research teams based upon the problem that you're trying to understand. But also, if you want to do these other forms of research, ensure that you recognize that participating scientists have to develop and evolve intellectually and professionally as they work in these kinds of research programs. So in short, we need to ensure that scientists in the 21st century are appropriately trained to participate in and lead these kinds of cross-disciplinary projects. And because we have extra time, I decided to stop after each challenge and open the floor for just a couple of questions for clarification, if anyone has that. And that will give me a chance to take a drink. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field them now. Yeah.
Are you familiar with sustained dialogue? And does it have a role in here?
So the concept of sustained dialogue within
Yes.
scientific teamwork,
Yes.
I've heard of it in the context of collaboration, but can you elaborate some more on the?
I just meant, do you use that concept when you're trying to teach people how to do this work?
I think that people in some of the scholarly areas that I mentioned earlier have looked at sustained dialogue, but I have not seen sustained dialogue applied to scientific teamwork.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
You looked at how successful they are with and without coaching science teams. Anyone?
So the question is the degree to which coaching has made a difference or not in science teams. And I have not seen any research on coaching in particular in science teams, and that's kind of a recurring theme you're going to hear me mention, that the science of team science is brand new. The amount of research on actual science teams is but a fraction of the ideas that have been developed. There has been a lot of research on teams more generally, where coaching has been shown to be effective, and coaching is a sub-area of leadership research that focuses on particular concepts and from a developmental standpoint. So I'd reframe it and pose it as a hypothesis that one of the roles of a science team leader is to act as a coach, and I can revisit that when I talk about some of the leadership theories, because I think that that is relevant from a developmental standpoint on science teams. Okay. So the next challenge, understanding what is meant by team science. So as you heard earlier, there's a kind of another definitional issue associated with this. What do we mean by team science? And what's important to recognize is that at its core, we're really talking about a team activity. So this is a process engaged by a coordinated scientific team. And what we've argued is that you should reframe this notion of scientific collaboration as a problem of teamwork. And by understanding the teamwork activities necessary for success, we can make the achievement of inter and transdisciplinary science teamwork more tractable. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned, there's decades of research on the study of teams more generally in organizations, in industry, in military, in the government. We've been studying teams for a number of decades now, and we've learned a lot about coordination and leadership and process and performance. So when we think about scientific collaboration as a process of teamwork, we can try to adapt and adopt these methods and theories to improve it. So the science of team science was specifically developed to try and do just this. So the National Cancer Institute was kind of at the forefront of developing the science of team science. Kara Hall and Dan Stokels were developing these initiatives a number of years ago. And as I mentioned, that the policy community had seen this increase in research investment in science teams. So they wanted to better understand how those investments were working. And Dan Stokels, in one of the publications in this, he noted that the reason for the development of the science of team science was the inherent complexity of contemporary public health, environmental, political, and policy challenges leads to the realization that an integration of multiple disciplinary perspectives is required to better understand and ameliorate these problems. So we're trying to bring together people from different disciplines to understand these problems. So the science of team science is really a method of better understanding science collaboration and trying to develop applications to improve science collaborations. And that's what we've been doing over the past few years. So my colleagues and I have been publishing, kind of laying the foundation for what we mean by the science of team science. At the forefront here, you see there was a special issue in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine that was published in 2008 by Dan Stokel's, Kara Hall, and colleagues at the National Cancer Institute. So what they did was bring together a number of their colleagues who had been studying this for a few years now and produce what I think is one of the richest resources available yet for understanding what we mean by the science of team science. So I highly recommend you take a look at it because they did a great job providing this big picture understanding of the state of the art with regard to that research at the time. But it was also around this time that I published in this area, coming at it from a different angle. I had been studying teams and organizations and in the military for a number of years, but I had also realized that there was this gap in our knowledge of understanding scientific teamwork. And actually, this paper of mine, Interdisciplinary as Teamwork, How the Science of Teams Can Inform Team Science, came out at around the same time as this American Journal of Preventive Medicine issue came out. And I was coming at it, like I said, from a different angle. I was a team researcher who had been studying teams in different domains, but also watching this increased interest on scientific collaboration. And my point with this article was to note that we know a lot about teamwork, and we're ready to start adapting these theories and methods and testing them out in the study of science teams. The goal being we need to bring together these different groups who have a focused interest on scientific collaborations. So we've been publishing a number of papers more at this high level over the past few years. In Science Translational Medicine, we published this multi-level systems perspective for the science of team science, where we noted that this is itself a multi-level phenomena, that you need to understand the micro-level issues, that is the individuals who are engaged in scientific teamwork. You need to understand the meso-level issues, that is the group dynamics that emerge in science teams, but you also need to understand the macro-level issues, the organizational infrastructures, for example, that support or inhibit scientific collaboration. And we published a research agenda back in 2011 in the journal Research Evaluation, where we elicited the knowledge of experts. These were people from the policy community, people such as academic deans, department heads, scientists who study teams, scientists who practice scientific collaboration. And we elicited from them what they thought of team science and what they thought were some of the more important areas that needed to be studied. And this helped us lay the initial foundation for this research roadmap. But there was gaining a lot of attention and interest in this phenomena, and the National Academy of Science recognized this need, and they put together a consensus study where we've assembled a team of scholars from different disciplines who are trying to pull from experts their knowledge and their understanding about the state of what we know about teams, and about the gaps in our understanding with regard to scientific teamwork. And we're producing this report now with input from people from a variety of disciplines, so people from the life sciences, physical sciences, the social sciences, computational sciences, and design and engineering as well. So you're probably wondering, what does design and engineering have to do with team science? Anyone, how many of you think you have an understanding of why design and engineering matters for team science? I see no nods, I see smiles. Well, the reason this matters is because I'm sure many of you have been in buildings where the president of the university, the provost, has had this public relation piece put out where it says, we've just built this $300 building that is going to support collaboration in science. It's going to support innovation. So essentially what they're trying to do is design for collaboration. So I'm sure on this campus you may have some buildings that are brand new, that they have collaboration areas, they have rotating classrooms, they have shareable lab spaces, et cetera. And these are all the kinds of claims that I see made around the country and around the world where they're investing literally hundreds of millions of dollars to build these things. And that's a problem. It's a problem because we don't know if they work. These are all people going on their intuition and on their gut that says, yes, this seems like a great idea. These are very attractive buildings, but we don't know the degree to which they're actually effective. So what we're pushing here is for a more rigorous study of the degree to which these collaboration centers, these collaboration buildings actually function. So this in and of itself is an interdisciplinary endeavor. It involves sociologists, anthropologists who need to go and embed themselves in these infrastructures. It involves architects and engineers to study the particular design. So I see this as a very important issue with regard to the science of team science. It's not just about the group dynamics, it's about the embedded context in which scientists find themselves and the buildings and laboratories that are built to support them and the degree to which they are truly facilitating or inhibiting collaboration. So to address this challenge, what is meant by team science, we really need to try, and what we're trying to do is maximize our capacity to address societal challenges. So we want to recognize that we need input not just from people from different disciplines, but people that cross-disciplinary, government, industry, academic, and citizen partnerships. And more importantly, I think we need to recognize that we have to develop particular education and training programs for team science. And I realize I'm preaching to the choir here because the CTSA has specifically been developed to do just this. But this is an important pedagogical issue. If you want people who are able to think across disciplines, the training needs to start early. You can't start at the postdoc or at the junior scientist level. It really needs to begin at graduate school, and some might submit it needs to begin earlier than that. So the goal is you need to train and educate for intellectual flexibility. You want people to be able to understand how to think across disciplines, how to combine and juxtapose ideas from different disciplines. But you also need to help people understand that they should think about how to solve societal problems. So how can this knowledge that they're gaining be used to address the kinds of complex problems that we're facing globally? So how can they apply the knowledge that they're learning? And this is an important pedagogical issue, and this is a sub-area of the science of team science that really needs a lot of attention. Because it cuts across academic departments, and these are students who not only are acquiring specific disciplinary expertise, they need to understand also how to think across disciplines, and this is no small task. And this has been the core of interdisciplinary research for decades now. They've been publishing and writing about this for a long time. If you read back in, for example, the medical and life sciences, it started in the 50s. When they recognized that students needed to be trained across disciplines, there were discussions about, well, what's the appropriate breadth versus depth? What's the right level of competency students need to acquire within a particular discipline versus across disciplines? These are not easy questions, but we don't do these things because they're easy. We're doing these things because we're trying to solve hard problems. And as I said, I recognize that you all are faced with that right now in your center, and I just encourage you to think about how to bring in people from different departments, different areas to help you understand this phenomenon. For example, schools of education or other social scientists to try and improve this pedagogy. So any questions before I move on to the next one? Yes.
So it would seem to me that people who train in disciplines that come together, biomedical engineering or cognitive sciences, would have that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any empirical evidence that they're more likely to go outside their new discipline and perform even others?
Okay, so there's kind of two questions there. There's first, people who are already getting trained in interdisciplinary domains like bioengineering or cognitive science should be predisposed to think along those lines. So some of the research that I've seen in that area suggests there's a selection bias. So they haven't really done any controlled studies. They've looked essentially pre and post type studies, and they find that people who select those areas of inquiry already think along multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary lines. The key question is, if you randomly assign students, for example, to these different domains, and you see the degree to which they graduate at the end, are those students who are getting trained in a particular disciplinary approach versus those who are trained in a cross-disciplinary approach thinking differently? That is, are they better able to combine and juxtapose? That kind of research has not been done. So the second part of the question, though, was more along the lines of, are they, the graduates of those kinds of programs, more predisposed to engage themselves in interdisciplinary research? And as far as empirical evidence for that, I haven't seen any, but I think that by and large, the fact that they have got interdisciplinary degrees means that they're going to be working with teammates who are also thinking across disciplines. So for example, in cognitive science programs, you are going to be doing research more likely where you're working with computer scientists or neuroscientists or physicists or anthropologists. So you're more likely to see research across those disciplines. And I'm sure in areas like bioengineering, if you want to continue that line of research, because that's still a developing area, you're likely to have to work across departments and across programs to continue that kind of research inquiry. Okay. Yes?
So the early push is for learning within each other's disciplines versus learning about working on teams specifically?
Was that a question or a statement?
Well, that's a question.
Okay. So I would characterize that as a tension. So the tension is you want them to acquire some level of mastery, some level of competence within their own disciplines, but you also want them to acquire some level of knowledge about other disciplines, but you also want them to acquire competence in working as a team. So these are separable concepts. So there's the knowledge component, and then there's the collaborative component. And what you're seeing more and more across the country, at least here in the United States, and actually more so in Europe from what I've seen, a lot more problem-based learning approaches. So those of you in the medical and life sciences, I'm sure you're familiar with problem-based learning, but there's other approaches that are being developed, team-based learning, studio-based learning, but essentially these are all pedagogical practices where students are learning the content simultaneously with learning the collaboration. So those are still, for the most part, within disciplines, though. So what they're doing is teaching mastery of the content while also teaching the collaboration skills. It's a separate issue with regard to teaching interdisciplinary collaboration. Dan Stokels has written a little bit about this based upon the School of Social Ecology and the interdisciplinary programs that they've developed at UC Irvine. So they have a number of interdisciplinary seminars that are specifically designed to bring students together from different disciplines to try and teach them not only the content, but how to work across those disciplines.
We're at the exact same point with working on interprofessional education in the clinical world. And I'm just wondering are you familiar with that? Do you feel like the science teams are ahead of the clinical team learning? I'm wondering if you have any insights into how you think that works.
Actually, I think the interprofessional, when I was started reading this literature, it was the interprofessional academics who recognized this need decades ago. So some of the early work on interdisciplinarity in universities had to do with interprofessional education. And that's where you first started to see recognition of the collaborative and group dynamics that emerge and the conflict that emerge when you're putting students together from these different disciplines. So one part of the answer to that question is they were doing this before, I think, scientists were. But for the very reasons I articulated earlier, there was concern about the appropriate levels of competence. So when you're training professionals, they need to be licensed and they need to be tested to get those licenses. So there was more of a concern that they have the core competencies to be a licensed professional than there was that they have the core competencies to work across disciplines. And I have not, I don't think one is more advanced than the other at this point. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi. So you mentioned there's a need for identity flexibility and cognitive flexibility to cross disciplines. Can you speak, is there a particular type of training method that's been shown to produce one or both of these capacities that you think could be reasonably integrated into, say, graduate education?
Well, identity flexibility is probably more an outcome than a particular form of training. So that has to do with what you see yourself as from a professional identity. So I don't really think there's training for that. There may be support for it or encouragement for it. So from a motivational standpoint, graduate program directors might say, it's okay if you don't want to be an X, you can be this other kind of professional. With regard to the interdisciplinary education, Julie Thompson-Klein has written extensively about creating interdisciplinary campuses, and she's published a few books that talk about specific methods for teaching across disciplines. And I mentioned Dan Stokels has also written about the work that they've been doing at UC Irvine. And what it boils down to so far has to do with identifying the particular activities that graduate students can engage in. So they talk about interdisciplinary seminars, which are courses where they bring together students from different disciplines. They talk about interdisciplinary colloquia or brown bags, so the more informal education component. And they talk about interdisciplinary conferences, so they're kind of stacking it at these multiple levels where it's the formal basis of graduate seminars where students are brought in to and become comfortable with how other people think about a particular problem. And in those kinds of seminars, you can pick a particular pedagogy that might be most useful. So I've seen, again in medical education, team-based learning is a new one now, and that evolved kind of out of problem-based learning, but it's a bit more rigorous than problem-based learning. In the physical sciences, I've seen studio-based learning as an approach, where it's much more about the design and the iterative focus, where you're working on very ill-structured problems, and the director or the facilitator in those settings, the instructor, has a much more explicit role in the student learning process because it is very iterative because the problems are so ill-defined. So those are the ones that I've been reading about most recently.
Thank you.
Okay. So now to the meat of this issue, that is how to do scientific teamwork. So I'll provide a little bit of background here. So what do we mean by teams? And I've mentioned numerous times already that there's a large and rich body of literature on teamwork. So we talk about this idea that teams are composed of people and we have multiple information sources and there's a high level of communication within the team members. They all have task-relevant knowledge and there's interdependencies amongst these tasks. And we talk about the affective and attitudinal components that emerge to produce the kinds of group dynamics that are helpful or harmful to the teamwork. And there's coordination among all of these members with specialized roles. So I could have taken those definitions and you could easily apply them to science teams. And the point here is that there's not that much difference with regard to why we form teams in generally and why we form science teams. That is, you're bringing people together who could not achieve an objective on their own. They work and they coordinate their activities while maintaining only partially overlapping knowledge. And I think that's one of the core features here. So teams have always been formed with people who do not have perfectly overlapping sets of knowledge and skills. If they did, there really would be little purpose for the team in the first place. So the challenge is understanding how to get these complementary sets of knowledge coordinated so they can achieve the objectives that they were set out to achieve. And think about this with science teams. That's the very reason we're assembling science teams. That within disciplines, the knowledge has become so rich that we cannot all study these different disciplines and master the content from these different disciplines. Ben Jones, an economist at Northwestern, has written extensively about what he calls the burden of knowledge. And he has documented the increasing amount of knowledge produced within disciplines and shown that it's impossible for any one person to essentially be the Renaissance person. So we cannot master content from numerous disciplines these days, and that's why we need to form teams to work together to solve these kinds of complex problems. So the burden of knowledge problem really gets at the core of why we need scientific teamwork. We're trying to address complex problems, and we need people from different disciplines to help us get a richer and fuller understanding and come to the solutions that are needed to solve these problems. So now I want to get into the weeds with some of the specifics that you're going to be talking about today, trust and conflict. So if you look at the science of team science early on at the National Cancer Institute, they started to identify some of these issues. So in 2008, Kara Hall and colleagues, they were looking at what we call the interpersonal processes, things like conflict resolution and trust, and they noted that feelings of trust were essential prerequisites for effective collaboration in cross-disciplinary teams, and also that organizational factors can contribute to greater trust and cohesion. Dan Stokels and colleagues noted that the importance of establishing interpersonal trust and respect among team members was considered to be one of the most commonly cited factors that exerts a strong influence on the effectiveness of a particular team. And they specifically note that conflict from divergent disciplinary worldviews, competing theoretical and methodologic perspectives, different departmental affiliations, and dissimilar interpersonal styles can hinder the formulation of clear goals and their accomplishment. So here we see the beginnings of the recognition of the role of trust and conflict in science teams. And what I want to transition to now is how the study of teams can help enrich this understanding. And at a very high level, when researchers look at teams, they try to differentiate between task work and teamwork. So task work pertains specifically to what needs to be accomplished to meet particular goals. So you can think about this as the scientific work of science teams. So these are things like understanding the relevant theory, the concepts and the methods, developing the experiments and the procedures that are necessary to solve a particular problem, conducting analyses, interpreting the results, and writing up the papers. This is the task work, the very stuff of science. But that is juxtaposed with the complementary role of teamwork. So this refers to the attitudinal, behavioral, and cognitive factors that are necessary for teams to actually achieve these complex ends. So from the attitudinal standpoint, we can talk about the affective issues, for example, that arise when you work with teammates, things like trust. From the behavioral standpoint, these are the kinds of skills that support coordinating among team members, things like leadership. From the cognitive standpoint, we can talk about things like knowledge, the understanding of the roles and responsibilities of your teammates. And we refer to these in the study of teams as the ABCs of teams. This is kind of a useful heuristic that we've developed to look at how these factors intermingle. And what we argue is you need to understand how these interact and emerge within science teams in such a way that we can ameliorate any problems that also leverage the success of these emergent behaviors to facilitate team performance. So using that as a stepping off point, we can talk about trust in teams. So trust in and of itself is an interesting concept because it's been studied by many different disciplines. In the social sciences, for example, organizational sciences, they've been studying trust for a number of years. And even in engineering and computer science, they've been studying trust. For example, trust in technology and how users of particular technology have different levels of trust and how that impacts performance. So a very rich construct, and you can do an entire dissertation just on trust in and of itself. But I want to use this difference between task work and teamwork to illuminate some of the issues that arise with trust in science teams. So there's this notion of intellectual trust, which some refer to as cognitive trust or task-based trust. And this has to do with the predictability and reliability one has in another to execute and complete tasks. So this is about knowledge accumulated from observations and reputations and relationships. So do you trust this person is competent? Can they get the job done? But then there's interpersonal trust. So what do you think about that person? This relates to the social bonds that emerge when we work with other people. So these are the kinds of interpersonal concerns, and this too is based upon the repeated interactions we have with others and the kind of reciprocated concern that they've shown for us. So I wanted to point out this distinction between task-based trust and team-based trust, the kind of interpersonal trust, because sometimes these get conflated in the literature, and it's important to differentiate between them when you're working on science teams. Similarly with conflict, this is another rich area that has been studied by a number of disciplines. We talk about the awareness on the part of team members of discrepancies, incompatible wishes, or irreconcilable desires that affect teamwork. And we can look at conflict from the standpoint of tasks and teams as well. So we talk about intellectual or task-based conflict, sometimes referred to as cognitive conflict. So this has to do with disagreements, for example, around particular concepts or theories or methods that one may use to solve a particular problem. And this is based upon or developed through the opinions or viewpoints that emerge after interactions with our teammates. So you may have conflict about the resources that are available, how to distribute the resources, the procedures you're going to adopt, how you're interpreting the ideas, or how you're interpreting the data. But there's also interpersonal or relationship-based conflict. So this has to do with interpersonal incompatibility. This could arise due to differences in personality, differences in attitudes, differences in values. And the point here is that you need to differentiate between cognitive or intellectual conflict as well as interpersonal conflict. And we can see these emerge in science teams in different ways. So intellectual trust is essentially the scientist's confidence or willingness to rely on another's competence. Interpersonal trust is the confidence that the scientist places in a teammate based upon feelings of security and level of concern demonstrated. Both of these will influence collaboration. They increase the confidence in each other, and they increase the help-seeking behaviors that they have with each other. They increase the free exchange of information. And I think you can just reflect upon prior interactions you've had and think about people where you had, for example, high intellectual trust, but maybe low interpersonal trust. Maybe you just didn't like that person for something, for some reason. You didn't like their attitude, but you knew they were a stellar scientist. So these kinds of dichotomies can emerge, and it's important to recognize, for example, when there may be someone who's a jerk, and you have low interpersonal trust, but by God, they're the best at what they do. So you may want to work with them because they have that kind of competence. Similarly, with regard to conflict in science teams, intellectual conflict in these environments describes knowledge-based disagreements, things that pertain to theory and the constructs and the methodologies. Interpersonal conflict, though, again, has to do with the people on the teams, the degree to which team members are not getting along, there's producing animosity among the teammates. And both of these similarly affect collaboration, but there's an important distinction when it comes to conflict. We want the intellectual conflict. We want the cognitive conflict. That's how new ideas emerge. That's the clashing of disciplines that produce the new disciplines. They produce the new concepts. This is where the integration that I spoke about earlier emerges. When you bring smart people together and they're passionate about what they want to do and passionate about solving problems, it's the intellectual conflict that can lead to that. The challenge is you also have to manage the interpersonal conflict. You have to manage the attitudes and the different values that these scientists may bring to the table. And sometimes these interpersonal conflicts can mask the intellectual conflict. So leaders of science teams and members of science teams need to recognize these important distinctions. So now I want to segue to this idea of leadership in science teams by talking about some of the theory that's come out of studying leadership in organizations. So team leadership is defined broadly as something that enables the maintenance and growth of team members, something that promotes the coordination and adaptations of teams. And Joe McGrath, one of the leaders in social psychology who has studied these, he put it best when he said, leadership provides the means to do or get done whatever is not being adequately handled for group needs. So the buck stops there. They're the ones that people go to, they're the ones that people rely on when there's problems, and they help get things done, or at least effective leaders help get things done. So this has been studied quite extensively. Again, leadership is one of the concepts that crosses disciplines. And here's an example of a meta-analysis that was done a few years ago that showed that leaders exhibit both task-focused and person-focused leadership behaviors. Task-focused behaviors produce about 12% of the variance in performance outcomes. Person-focused or developmental leadership lead to about 10% of the variance. But what this meta-analysis showed is that it is the degree of interdependence within the teams that really matters when it comes to leadership. So interdependence has to do with how much do the team members need to rely on each other to achieve their goals. If they can work separately, then leadership really didn't matter as much. But if they are highly dependent upon each other, leadership behavior accounted for nearly 20% of the variance in the performance outcomes. So the point I want you all to walk away with here when thinking about science teams and leadership in science teams is make sure you understand fully the degree of interdependence within those teams, because that's going to drive the particular leadership behaviors that are necessary to support those teams. Another important element, and that was touched upon earlier actually when the question about coaching came up. When you look at leadership, what we talk about is both task performance and team learning. So sure, leaders are there to support teamwork. That is, they foster the team interdependence, they take member input and use them to solve problems, they help the team stay focused on what they're trying to do. But we should not lose the fact that good leaders also focus on team learning. And what that means is they really want to help team members understand why they're doing things the way they're doing. So a good team leader will explain, for example, the rationale for their decisions. They won't say, just do it and don't ask me why. They'll explain why they're choosing a particular method or a particular approach. They help the team members gain self-efficacy. They themselves are a model for teamwork. So they create a supportive climate and they support the collective performance. So it's important that team leaders understand these complementary roles that they need to play. And again, you can sit back and reflect upon your own experience with team leaders and think about the leaders that you knew who were damn good task-focused leaders. That is, they knew how to get the job done, but they weren't necessarily good developmentally. That is, they weren't there mentoring, for example, junior members of the team. And we shouldn't forget that as universities and as educational institutions, this can't be lost sight of. That is, we need to ensure that team leaders recognize the value of not just the task performance, but also developing team learning. You want the leaders to also be mentors. Are they taking input from the junior team members? Are they taking input from the graduate students, the postdocs? Are they using that? Are they treating them as team members? And are they also educating them appropriately, creating and cultivating the next generation of scientists? Now I want to go even narrower and focus on a particular theory of leadership that I think is relevant to science teams, and this is the functional approach to leadership developed by Steve Zaccaro and colleagues. And I think this one is relevant because it focuses on social problem solving. That is, it views leadership as a form of social problem solving. And he emphasizes, or they emphasize, the role of the leader as a boundary spanner. That is, linking the team and the environmental context in which they operate. And based upon that, what the leader does is interpret events in that environment and tries to manage the events and the team's interaction with the context to support the attitudinal, behavioral, and cognitive factors. So first, from the affective and attitudinal standpoint, what leaders do is they manage the motivational processes. They can directly manage team members' motivation, through example, by things such as reward strategies. They can indirectly manage a team's motivation through things like planning and personnel development. Importantly, the team leaders will set the team norms. They'll develop the team climate. So a good team leader in science are going to support this norm of openness. They're going to create a sense of safety for the team members. Well, what does that mean? That means that the leader is going to ask a graduate student what they think. They're not just going to view the graduate student as workers, they're going to view them as members of a team. And they want the graduate students and the postdocs to be comfortable with regard to speaking out. So this is important to recognize because data suggests that in many of the sciences, the good ideas are emerging in the 20s and the 30s. So these are your graduate students and your postdocs. So if you're a smart leader, you know who you should be listening to for the innovative ideas. So a good leader is going to create this kind of climate where people are not afraid to speak out. But at the same time, this issue of conflict is important with regard to climate and culture. So a good leader is going to foster the intellectual or cognitive conflict and dampen the interpersonal conflict. That is, they're going to manage any of these interpersonal problems, but they're going to encourage the cognitive conflict. So when there's disagreements, they're not going to say, we need to move on. They're going to say, okay, why are we disagreeing about this method? Why are we disagreeing about this theory? Because again, that's when the innovation starts to emerge. From the behavioral standpoint, what the leaders will do is influence coordination. So a good leader is going to make team members aware of what's happening in their environment. They're going to help them understand what is influencing, for example, their budget. They're going to let them know what resources we have available, and they're going to help them understand why they may need to adapt or adopt due to, example, a decrease in their budget. So the leader is always monitoring the environmental changes and helping the team adapt to those environmental changes. And last, the leader is going to influence cognition by ensuring that every member of the team knows the roles and responsibilities of their teammates. So they're not going to act as kind of like the gatekeeper for that team. They want to make sure everybody knows who is the particular expert, who they need to go to solve a particular aspect of the problem. So they want to make sure the team not only understands the objectives and goals, they want to make sure the team members understand the roles and responsibilities of the particular teammates. So the point to walk away with is the functional theory of leadership is one of many theories that have been developed out of the organizational sciences that I think can inform improving scientific collaboration. So I'm just going to wrap up. I have a few slides about the awareness of resources available. And I wanted to bring this up because this is an exciting area that's come up over the past few years where people are really trying to create the technologies and the infrastructure to support team science. You're already familiar with the Collaboration in Team Science Field Guide that Michelle Bennett and Howard Gadlin and colleagues developed at the National Institutes of Health. This is an excellent resource. One of my favorites is when they talk about the prenuptial agreement for science teams. So this is a clever way to get scientists to think about the challenges that might emerge. So they pre-brief them on, look, there's going to be problems. This is not going to be pretty. You're going to fight. And the prenup kind of makes that explicit and makes people aware of the problems that might emerge. And again, you'll be going into more detail about that later. There's also Team Science Net, which was developed out of Northwestern through one of their CTSA's fundings. And this is an e-learning resource where there's a number of experts who talk about teamwork, and they have case studies where you can get kind of different perspectives on collaboration in science teams. And there's also been a large amount of development in software technology to help team members find collaborators. So these are like dating services for scientists. So find out scientists who have similar interests to yours or who have complementary interests to yours, who has the kind of knowledge, who has the kind of expertise that you need to solve a particular problem. Kara Hall and colleagues wrote about this in 2012. They note that this enables investigators to search for collaborators with particular substantive and methodological areas of expertise who are located within their institutions or at external institutions. So there's biomed experts in vivo, and SciVal has been developing this, and you're going to learn a lot more about SciVal in about an hour or so. And last but not least is the Team Science Toolkit that's been developed out of the National Cancer Institute. And we just published a paper on this that goes into some detail about what are the resources available. But this was specifically designed for those interested in the science of team science. So if you are a scientist who are practicing team science, you can go there and explore the kind of resources that have been made available, for example, to help you measure teamwork and some of the interventions to improve teamwork. But if you're also someone who's studying teams, there's resources there as well that can help you along those lines. But we also have developed this where people can contribute. So if you're a practicing scientist or a scholar of teams, please upload your information, your resources to the toolkit. And it's also a means to connect with interested colleagues. So it's a way to talk to others who have been doing similar things so you can learn from each other to try and create what we call this community of scholars in the science of team science. Another important point I want people to recognize with regard to the toolkit is it's available and useful for people at different levels. So you could be a leader or a member of a science team and there's resources there for you. You can be someone who's been tasked with evaluating science teams, measuring science teams, and there's resources like survey instruments there. You can be an administrator, a dean, for example, or department chair, and there's things there that may be of use for you, such as promotion and tenure policies that can help you manage the challenges associated with interdisciplinary scholars. And if you're someone from funding agencies, there's also funding announcements that are available if you're interested in collaborative science efforts. So last, there's the International Science of Team Science Conference. So this is where we bring together scholars who are practicing scientists and also those who are studying science teams. Our next conference is August 6th through 8th. And I mentioned the Interdisciplinary Network for Group Research. These are scholars who study groups and teams from multiple disciplines. If you want to get an idea of cutting-edge research in this area, our conference is in the middle of July in Raleigh. So just to sum up here, we need to pay better attention to what we mean by cross-disciplinary research and recognize that there are different forms of cross-disciplinary research that are going to be appropriate to the particular problems that people are trying to solve. We need to make sure people understand what we mean by team science. We need to make sure that people understand how to bring in different experts from academia, industry, non-governmental organizations, and also to ensure we're developing the educational pedagogy that's going to support team scientists. And we also need to understand how to leverage the tremendous body of research that has come out of studying teams and organizations for decades now, and how to apply that to the study of scientific teams. And finally, we need to take advantage of the resources that are being made available for science teams to improve the collaboration. And I want to add one final thing, that you as practicing scientists need to make yourself available to people like me who study teams. We're not going to get any better at this if you people refuse to collaborate with us. So fill out the annoying surveys, sit down and deal with the interviews, help us collect the kind of data. You are the data. You are the methods of analyses that we need. So we want to ask you questions, we want to study your processes, we want to study your outcomes, and the science of team science is not going to go anywhere without participation and collaboration from you. And I know there's intellectual arrangements that need to be made. I know there's different challenges that emerge from this kind of work, but these are not insurmountable. So again, when someone comes knocking on your door and says, hey, I want to study your center, I encourage you to open that door and let them in. And I'll end it there. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
I thought it was a terrific talk. Thank you very much. I think that Dr. Rudig asked a question earlier about sort of how to accelerate team science and so forth. And you talked about and what is known about effective teams, and you described sort of a randomized controlled trial concept.
Right.
When Ellie Zerhouni sort of did the CTSAs several years ago, the purpose was to accelerate the productivity of science. And the RCT is not the way to go to do that. And so the question, and the measure of success that you offered was number and impact of publications as sort of the dependent variable that you might be interested in seeing. And I'm just wondering what kinds of studies might be different than the labor-intensive and long-term productivity of RCTs as the outcome. Thinking of things as simple as case control studies, or positive deviance approaches, or social network analysis, or something that might be a different kind of approach to determining which teams are effective and which teams are not, and sort of the nosology of the system or the problems that they're looking at that could help address that.
Okay. Well, first, I don't want anyone to ever think that I think publications are the output metric that matters. I was referring to the Wukdi, Utsi, and Jones paper that was published in Science in 2007, where they looked at publications and they looked at scientific productivity based upon collaborative teams producing those. But I think because of that, publications are the default metric that is used to evaluate scientific productivity. And that's really merely an artifact of the way we evaluate scientists more generally. So tenure, we look at their publications. Where are they publishing? How many publications have they produced? So that's kind of a mindset that we need to do away with. I think some of the other metrics that matter are the degree of collaboration that emerges. And the reason things like social network analysis are helpful is they can help us track the collaborations that may emerge. So you could have a science center that's funded for 5 years. And sure, people may publish a handful of papers based upon that kind of work, but they may develop ideas that get translated to other environments that are no longer tracked by an evaluations of that science center. So you can use methods like social network analysis to see what kind of grants have been produced. So grants are a good indicator that show that innovative ideas are being produced along the lines of new ideas that are relevant and potentially fundable by funding organizations. So publications are the downstream. There's also the upstream things like grants. There's also other metrics that can be used, such as interdisciplinary conferences that people may hold, the degree to which students get exchanged across centers across the country, things like the number of PhDs that graduate out of the centers, or the number of postdocs that go through the centers. And then at that point, what would be of interest is that not the quantity, but the particular content, for example, in the dissertations. So is this truly an interdisciplinary PhD? Is this truly a translational PhD? Or is it a traditional PhD? Are they still embedded in a particular disciplinary approach? Or was this something that was actually trying to produce an application that was solving a real-world problem that the centers were set up to do? So those, I think, are the more interesting metrics associated with it. And with regard to evaluating them, this idea of professional identity shouldn't be discarded. So this is where you bring people in to have interviews, do structured interviews with people within the center. Find out how the dialogue has been emerging within those centers. Organizational sciences have developed a method called 360-degree feedback, where different stakeholders are used in the evaluation. I think something like that would be helpful, where the different partners of these centers are used to try and understand how people are developing professionally and personally within those centers. So talk to the patients, talk to the other scientists, talk to colleagues around the country to see how people are changing. So this gets to the identity issue. So that has to do with the metrics. The other approach, though, you're right, we're not going to be able to do randomized control trials when you're looking at the embedded field studies. So that's where you need to take a range of different methods. So a case study is one such approach, and you can walk away with a case study with a set of knowledge. And the way I think about case studies is that they can inform, for example, laboratory research. So a lot of people who study teams actually look at teams in a laboratory. And when I say laboratory, I don't mean medical research laboratories, I mean social science laboratories. So if we do a case study and we find out there's coordination problems where, for example, people from one discipline are not sharing information appropriately from another discipline, we can set up an experiment to test that using, for example, student teams in graduate school who are taking these seminars. And we can do more carefully controlled studies in those kinds of contexts that may be informative and help us apply them to applications or to interventions for actual science centers. And that's really been what's been going on in business schools and in psychology departments for years now. Yeah.
The question I have has to do with sort of a more systematic way of thinking about bridges across disciplines. As I understand your comments, the leaders of these various projects would have an opportunity to recognize these intellectual conflicts and perhaps try to address them in some way, which would be a pragmatic approach that would be specific to that particular project. In terms of thinking about the vertical integration of knowledge, so that we begin to systematically look at differences across disciplines, and are those differences simply using different methods to answer different questions, or are there in fact better ways to understand the underlying problems that this sort of research, that might create opportunities for specific questions and specific research proposals. So the question is, do you know of any systematic activities already ongoing that might address the concern of creating consilience, if you will, or if you don't like that word,
it's a loaded
vertical
word.
Integration of knowledge might be perhaps a less distasteful word for some people.
So, yeah, I think there were a few things I heard in that question. One was the role of the leader as kind of someone who helps as the boundary spanner. So there's different boundaries that a leader needs to span. There's the environment in which the teams operate. So a team leader has to deal with the administration, the bureaucracy that goes along with science, as well as the science itself. But you're referring more to the boundary across disciplines. So the leader of science teams needs to manage the kind of intellectual integration that you want to emerge from scientific collaboration. And then the other question is, how do we encourage this kind of interdisciplinary integration? And I prefaced it that way because I don't think it's just the role of the leader to do this. I think it's the role of the leader to set up the climate, to set the culture where the team members, whether they be students or postdocs, are encouraged to seek out the kind of knowledge that they need to solve a problem. So I'm sure you all have seen instances where you set a student out on a literature review and you encourage them to seek out knowledge not just from their home discipline, but from multiple disciplines. And you want them to encourage them to go talk to the experts in those fields. So there could be different instances where they have an advisor that says, why did you go talk to the anthropology department? You know, that's not your home discipline. You need to stick in biology. but they may have come across something that seemed relevant and they went to talk to the anthropology department. So you want this both bottom-up interest and top-down management to encourage it, and it's this sense of openness. And this has been something that has been talked about for a number of years now, and there are methods that I mentioned earlier when it came to the educational practices that people have been looking at. So there's the classes themselves, where the students become comfortable with each other, so familiarity with different disciplines, and there's the classes that are designed similarly to make them familiar with content. And this has to do with the juxtaposition between task work and teamwork. So the interdisciplinary seminars that I think are going to be most effective at producing consilience, or this integration, are the ones that recognize that you need to manage the task work and the teamwork. That is, you need to manage students' understanding how a particular method or theory is going to inform understanding a given problem, and how to elicit that knowledge from other teammates. So you need to be a good listener as well as a good thinker, because you need to say, hey, you know, in your discipline, you try to solve a problem a particular way, and that's a hard skill for students to master. And that's why I think problem-based learning and team-based learning and studio-based learning helps them cultivate these skills that will produce knowledge integration. And the way I think about it is, I'll go back to the quote from Karl Popper. We are students of a problem. We are not students of disciplines. So diabetes, you know, that's not just a medical issue. That's a socioeconomic status problem. There's political issues associated with that, economic issues, as well as medical issues. So trying to solve these kinds of problems requires that the students understand and are encouraged to go outside their home discipline to do that. And it has to start with the seminars, and they have to learn the kind of collaboration skills to reach out to people from different disciplines. So the pedagogy needs to be structured so that they become comfortable with asking questions to people outside their discipline, is I think the best way to approach it. Anyone else? Yeah.
Steve, has anybody studied the anxiety that people experience when transitioning from a multidisciplinary approach to a team science or interdisciplinary approach?
I think identity is probably the closest that has come to the anxiety component. So at the National Cancer Institute, when they were studying their CTSAs, they looked at not necessarily anxiety, but some of the antecedent conditions that led to more effective performance. So I'll preface that by saying they looked at one's inherent collaboration readiness. So if they were already thinking outside their discipline, if they were already reading other journals or reading or attending conferences outside their discipline, they seemed to be doing better within those kinds of interdisciplinary environments. So what I would infer from that is they are less anxious, and they're not dealing with the kinds of tension and the uncomfortableness. They're, if you want to say, they're comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that's an important component of what we're talking about here. What I've realized, you know, I won't use the term anxiety, but if you do interdisciplinary research, you need to recognize that you are not the expert in a particular area, and you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to have to rely on other people. So anxiety is an outcome that's based upon all of these antecedent conditions, but I haven't seen it specifically studied along those lines.
So I'm interested in maybe your observations so far in your study of interdisciplinary team science. You know, how long does the team stay together? Do people move in and out of it by discipline? Or what do you think is a deciding factor what this team physically looks like?
Well, there's a couple of the issues in there. So it sounds like the last part of the question had to do with the composition. What's the deciding factor of what a team looks like? So that's the team assembly problem. So there's something that you want to solve. You need to find the relevant experts to help you solve that problem. And right now what we know is it's word of mouth, and it's who you know that's going to lead to that. But some of the tools that I mentioned at the end of my talk are trying to be more systematic at doing that. So they're trying to identify experts who contribute to the effective team assembly. So finding the right composition of the team. The other part of your question, though, had to do with the boundaries of the teams and the temporal factors of the teams. So what we talk about in the science of team science is when you're a scientist, you're not just on one team. You are on multiple teams. So I'm sure every one of you sits on numerous projects, different scientific projects to which you're contributing. So you're spanning different team boundaries, and you have different roles on these teams, and you have different levels of contributions on these teams. So that's another part of this issue. And the other is the formation and the developmental trajectory of these teams. So you may have a team that is very successful, they solve the problem, and then they go about their own ways, and they don't continue doing research anymore. You may have a team that's successful and say, hey, let's continue this partnership, and you may go after additional funding. So I don't think there is any hard set rule. It just depends upon the nature of the problem, the nature of the collaboration, and frankly, the infrastructure in which they operate. So you may have had a great collaboration, but the bureaucratic infrastructure was too much of a pain, and you decided that it's not worth it to collaborate with that university or to collaborate with that department or that center, and you go about your own ways. So these are the kinds of things that when I say we need a multi-level approach to understanding scientific teamwork, we need to understand the degree to which the organization, that is the university, helps or hinders collaboration. So, you know, we don't want just people saying we support interdisciplinary research. We want them to put their money where their mouth is and say we want to encourage these teams to continue working together, and we're going to help them do that.
I'm afraid at this point we'll have to draw our questions and answers to a close. So please join me in thanking Dr. Fiore. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Sambath Chung. Dr. Chung comes to us from Elsevier. He is a consultant expert on SciVal, a tool that Dr. Fiore actually mentioned in his presentation. And this tool is available through our Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative to facilitate faculty research and project collaboration. He will be giving us a demonstration of SciVal. So Dr. Chung, welcome.
First, I'd like to thank Case Western Reserve for giving me the opportunity today to talk about Elsevier's SciVal Experts product and how it can help to advance team science and collaboration. But before that, what I thought I would do is just to take a few minutes to introduce you or to put the software application in context by going through a few slides. And after the slides, we'll go into the live demo, and I'll be happy to take any questions along the way or at the end. So, as we know, as we've heard, that research is becoming more global and is becoming more multidisciplinary. It's not uncommon to find research publications that covers many areas of what we used to think of as traditional research areas. Just to tell you from my own perspective, my background was classical Mendelian C. elegans genetics, and that's what I got my PhD in. But then at some point along the way, the field, the age of genomics came along, and I had to find computer scientists and bioinformaticists to work with. And so at that time, it was a little bit of a challenge to find the right collaborators, because for me, as a geneticist, I was trained to look at genes and all of a sudden now I have microarray data that covers millions of data points, and I needed some computer or bioinformaticists, computer scientists to help me narrow down from, say, 10,000 positive hits to 10 potential biomarkers that I'm looking at. And so this was, for me, was an example of the need for multidisciplinary collaboration. What it means is that along the way, you might have to tell the computer people what a gene is, and they might have to tell you the difference between a server and a laptop. And so the communications could be kind of interesting. But so we talked about that collaboration is good. Team research is good. But let's just put it into some concrete numbers. If you look at here, so this is the collaboration of Case Western's with one of your top research collaboration partner, and that's the University College London. Now, I want to draw your attention to a couple of numbers. So this is in the range of from 2011 to 2013, and you can see that for Case Western's, on average, we have about 5 citations per publications, and this is across multidisciplinary subjects. And I know that some subjects you have more citations per publication than others, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then down here you have field-weighted citation impact, and that is meaning that some fields are cited more, the velocity for citing. For example, in genetics, there's more citation impact per paper than, say, for example, mathematics. And what field citation impact does is that it normalizes it to that particular field, so that the average is 1, and if your field impact is more than 1, then you are definitely doing better than average. Now, if you look at the University College of London, the citation is 5. Citation per paper is 5. The field impact is 2. But look what happened when you have collaborations. The citation impact, the citation per paper goes up to 35. Now, you can see this is across multidisciplinary fields. In some of the higher velocity fields, such as genetics, and I actually dug into this, some of the citations per paper was approaching 200. Similarly, if you look at the field impacted citation, it goes up to 10. This is 10 times the normal or the average impact, which is 1. So this is a very concrete numbers, evidence to say that collaboration is good, and we need to do more of that. So how can SciVal expert help you to do that? Let me just say that when you, we already here at Case Western, we have SciVal experts here. And when you, when you have SciVal experts, you're already plugged into a whole network of other schools that have similar profiling applications, whether it's SciVal or some other applications. So just to put it in context, 22 of the 62 CTSA's members have SciVal experts. We have profile, there's 82 instances worldwide of SciVal experts across 14 countries. Of those 82, over 50 are publicly available to network with Case Western SciVal experts, and that we cover more than 116,000 experts profiles through these networks, and they cover 3.5 million publications. So the network, the infrastructure is already there. It's just waiting for you to take advantage of it, to find your collaborator and for your collaborator to find you. Now, how, just to take one step back a little bit, SciVal experts, what it does is that it ingests the data from our Scopus database. So our Scopus database is the largest citation database in the world. And what it does is that when you have a publication and it's captured in Scopus, then what it does is that Scopus would automatically feed your publication into your SciVal experts' profiles. This takes away from the pain of having researchers taking their valuable time away from research to auto-populate your profile. It covers the areas of health science, of life sciences, health science, physical sciences, social sciences, and arts and humanities. And we also starting to cover other areas such as books, for example. What SciVal Experts does is that in addition to Scopus database, it can also take in information that your institution can give us and the grant data, and this would help to make your profile more fuller so that when people, and more accurate so that people can find you by subject areas, by key concepts easy and more accurately. And this is done through a proprietary engine that we have. It's called Fingerprint Engine. And what it does is that, so it would mine the text. In this case, it can mine the text of, for example, grant applications or anything like that. But because this comes out of your publication, your abstract publication comes out of Scopus, we would mine the abstracts for key concepts and take that through thesaurized, a list of thesaurized, including MASH, compendiums, geotree, and so on, to filter out the key concepts, and then those concepts will be populated in your profile. So let me just, this is important because what this does is that it's different from just picking out keyword, because keyword oftentimes does not differentiate the context in which it appears. But what Elsevier Fingerprint can do is that it can, for example, differentiate between Michael Jordan and the Jordan River, or it can differentiate between the Jaguar the animal and Jaguar the car by looking at the whole context of that document, or that abstract, and say that this is, we're talking about a basketball player and not the river, or the animal and not the car. Okay. Through that fingerprint engine, we can then aggregate all the abstracts and other materials that we have of that researcher, and then we would come up with the profile of that researcher with the key concepts that their work cover. Not only can we do that at the individual level, but what we can also do is that we can aggregate the individual within a department or an institution to keep a fingerprint, a profile of the institution that the individuals belong to. So, so for example, you can say of all the researchers in your medical school, you can add up, you can aggregate all the fingerprints, and you can then say that, the Case Western Reserve Medical School is strong at, this list of areas, and this can also come up too. So, what I mentioned is that SciVal Experts, it's out there, and it actually interacts with other profiling tools too. So, the SciVal Experts it had, as I mentioned, 22 of 62 TSA's members, 80 institutions, has it across 14 countries. You can look through, your researcher, the researcher, can look through for anyone to collaborate with across these member SciVal community, or similarly, they can look for you through the SciVal community also. But we know that there's some other profiling tools too, for example, such as Vivo, Harvard Profile, and all that. We also linked up with those profiles too, so that you can also, through Case Western's SciVal Experts, you can look for potential collaborators at these other sites from within your SciVal Experts also. And similarly, they can look for you too. So at this point, I'll go ahead and go into the live demo. So this is the site for, as you can see, it's public site. Anyone can log into this. This is the site for Case Western Reserve SciVal expert site. And this is what people would see. This is how people would see your site and your profiles here at Case Western. So let's say for a moment, I'm from somewhere else, that doesn't really matter where, and I'm trying to say, well, I'm kind of curious about who at Case Western is an expert at a particular field. So at one point I used to work at Alzheimer's, so I'm just gonna pick that up. And you can see that you can search by concept, last name, or free text. We'll go through all of them in a minute. So I'm just gonna look at concept. Now, what you're going to do then is that what you can see is that the fingerprint engine would look at the concept of Alzheimer's, and then it would actually goes into all the different granularity of Alzheimer's, such as beta amyloid, precursors, secretase, and so on, so that you can select the particular researchers that are specific to those key concepts. So you can see here, there's actually more concept if you want to click on that. But you can see here we have Alzheimer's disease, amyloid beta peptide, and I think precursor and secretase is on there too. So I'm going to say, well, let's go into life in medicine, and I think amyloid beta peptides might sound interesting, and I think that's the more specific key concept that I'm interested in rather than just Alzheimer's in general. So I can click on that. And what this is going to do is that it's going to pull up all the experts at Case Western whose fingerprints match these concepts. So you could probably recognize many of these experts here, Dr. Lamb, Dr. Lee, Dr. Cummings, Dr. Smith, Dr. Yan, and so on. And you can see here that this is internal, meaning that it's just specific to Case Western. If you wanted to, you can go to the community, which is all the different SciVal community members. Or if you want to expand the network even wider, you can go to Direct to Experts, which includes non-SciVal experts also. You can also see here all the different granularity of the different concepts. You can add plaque, for example, if you wanted to include plaque as a concept in your search. But let's just say that, for example, you say, Dr. Yan looks interesting. Let me just click on him and see what he's all about, what he does, and to see if he would be a good potential collaborator for me. So this is Dr. Yan's profile page. You can see all his fingerprints. You can see all the publications that he's done. You can find similar experts here at Case Western and the journals that he's published in. You can see his trend of research topics, as well as research networks, and as well as grants. We'll go into those in a second, but I want to point out to this part here, publications. This publications here, just to remind you, it's auto-uploaded, auto-ingested from Scopus database, and it's auto-uploaded into your profile page so that you don't have to go through the pain of having to update your publications every time a new one comes out. So you can see here, here's his, and then you say, well, let me just, by the way, let me just say that there's a lot of functionalities, there's a lot of good features of this tool. I'll be around all day. I would be more than happy to answer any questions that's not covered here at this time, and to answer any questions and how you can use this tool more to advance your research. So you can see here that we're going to look at his research network. And you can see that here the line between him and another researcher, the thicker the line, the more publications they have together. The pink are the profile experts who are here at Case Western's. The larger the bubble, the more publication that researcher has. The gray one, we also captured external researchers too, just because you want to capture all your researchers, collaborators, not just the ones that's internal. And you can see that here too. So here's Dr. Yan. And here's Dr. Lee. We saw that earlier. And here's Dr. Trapp, another very prolific researcher here. And here's Dr. Miller. Excuse me. Thank you. So now you can see how quickly we can then see the profile of Dr. Yan. And then you can say, wow, he has a pretty good network. He seems like he's pretty plugged into the research community. So if you wanted to, you can look at other features of him. You can say, for example, institutional network. Let's see what other institution does he collaborate with. Excuse me. Okay. You can look at what other institutions he collaborates with. And because all of this is to give you an idea as somebody who's seeking a potential collaborator to see that, is this the person that I want to work with? Is this the person whose expertise expands to the fields that I work in? And so you can see that Dr. Yan has worked with, for example, Cleveland Clinic, Pfizer, Johns Hopkins, and so on. So he's done a lot of collaboration on his own already. And these are the internal groups here at Case Western. So now let's go back to experts' profile a little bit. So let me just go back and look at his fingerprint a little bit more. So you can see here that his fingerprints from all the abstracts of his publication covers the areas of amyloid precursor, Alzheimer's disease, beta protein precursor, neuroregulin, and so on. And this is going to expand the list so that this really gives you a good idea of the key concept that his publications have covered. It also tells you, for example, what other animal models he's worked in, for example, mice, C. elegans, Drosophila, and so on. And the different, the different genes that he's worked in, and as well as chemical substances. Okay. So at this point, let me go over to the grants for a minute. So we can look at the grants that Dr. Yan has received. These are NIH grants. We can pull in the NIH grants that he has received. For example, if he has received other kinds of grants that might not be covered, I mean, certainly we can augment that into his profile. So we can come in and look at the NIH grant because to see that what kind of grants he's covered for his past research. So this is nice. He's received a grant for $2.7 million, a grant for $1 million, and his most recent grant is for $300,000. So you can go into some of these grants. For example, let's look at the base one grant. And so what we have seen thus far is that you're approaching this from the concept of I have a possible project that I want to find somebody to work on. For example, if you are like a computer person and you want to look for a wet bench person, you can do that. Or if you are a wet bench person and you want to look for a computer person, you can do that. And that is you have a project in mind that you want to work on, and so you can try to find a person based on the concept. Now, on the other hand, let's say, for example, I know that this is the grant application that Dr. Yan wrote, but let's imagine for a moment that this was a grant description that you found at the NIH, and you say that, this grant application, it matches some of what I do. Let's say, for example, it's asking for, as part of NIH collaboration, it's asking for somebody from people from multidisciplinary areas, such as computer science and genetics, and maybe I have the computer science area but don't have the genetics area. I want to see who in the genetics areas that they can find and collaborate with, and based on this grant description application that I saw that's put out by the NIH. So what you can do then is just copy that whole thing, put it into the Find Expert search under free text, and then, again, this goes back to our fingerprinting engine. It would then fingerprint this grant application description and picked up all the concept terms of this grant application, and then find the matching experts at Case Western's that that work in these key concepts that you can collaborate with. And so, that's kind of how powerful and applicable the fingerprinting engine can do. It can do it at the publication level, it can do it at the grant level, and it can do with any information that you pull into your profile. So these are the different thesaurus that you can filter through. The right one, it picked the right one, which is medicine and life sciences. But for example, if you wanted to, you could have chose any of the other ones. But this is already the right one. Now, based on this application description, then you see that, well, neuregulin 1 is the key concept here. And then you can see that, well, here are all the different experts here at Case Western's whose work match up with this key concept. And not surprisingly, Dr. Jans shows up. I know that this is a little bit, it's for a demo purposes. I think it brings the point. I believe it brings the point of how this works. So now then you can say, okay, maybe Dr. Jan is the one I want to reach out to say, hey, do we want to go into this grant application together? Because this grant application sounds like it matches you, it matches me, so let's both of us apply for this grant application. So you can see that if we wanted to, we can search the whole community of SciVal experts, as well as the direct-to-experts community too. But this takes a little bit of time because it actually reaches out to not just the Case Western's site, but all the more than 50 sites of SciVal community experts that's out there. And it would pull up people from other places too, such as Northwestern or anywhere else, or OSU, for example. But I think at this point, I believe that I've demonstrated the power of this tool, how it can help you to find experts from other schools in other areas that you might want to collaborate with, and similarly, how experts from other schools in other areas could find you in the areas that you have expertise in. And at this point, I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you. Yes.
So you mentioned that Scopus is, you said, the world's largest database.
Abstract.
Are you developing any technologies that will facilitate knowledge discovery using this vast resource that you have available at your fingertips? Right now, we still do search in the old-fashioned way. But it seems that with these visualization technologies, you're developing these expert locator technologies that could also help us in knowledge discovery when we want to see what other disciplines might be finding, for example, on a particular concept or issue of interest to us.
Right. Thank you. So we are always, our technical office back in Amsterdam and other areas are always looking for ways to leverage and to take advantage of our Scopus database, as well as other relationships that we have with other data sources too. So, for example, we can put we've written reports about. So, for example, we have people asking us like about productivities of people who go to different places versus just staying in one place, and we call that brain transfer, and we've seen patterns to that. That is, the more people travel and collaborate and leave England to go to the U.S., leave the U.S. to go to England, and things like that, the more productive you are. So that's just one example that we are doing, as well as we have other tools and solutions that really at your fingertip you can see. For example, that slide that I show of the collaboration yields productivity, that comes right out of another tool that really within a few, within minutes, you can pull up to see who's your biggest collaborator is and what areas, and also points to the potential of other areas for collaborations with potential collaborators that you haven't done anything with yet. And so we are always trying to come up with new ways to discover new knowledge and data that can help advance team science and collaboration. Yes.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Chong. You mentioned the Scopus database.
Yes.
And I know you could use Cyval here as case it's free to access. What about the Scopus? Do you need like some type of subscription or something to access that one?
The short answer is yes, but what's nice about my role is just to help bring solutions to customers. I don't deal with the costs and pricings and things like that. And if you would like, I can point you to the right direction. But I mean, for me, in my role, it's about the value, the solutions, and how can we use what we have to help advance research and team science and collaboration.
Second
Yes.
question. How does this feed into, because I know most of the research you pulled up like from CASE and the UK and different parts of the world, how much information do they have covering parts of West Africa? I was curious about that, just doing research.
I'm sorry, how much information we cover?
Well, like, for instance, if you wanted to find a fellow collaborator in West Africa, for instance, just how much, because it looks like most of the information, at least what I saw, and from previously covers like the US, parts of Europe, parts of Asia, how much would cover that?
Right, so we use examples, I mean, as in anything, you use examples where you think it's most applicable, but I mean, we certainly have data, and I have to look at it just because I have not really drilled down into West Africa, for example, but I know that we have Cyval, we have work in Africa, as well as let me just, if they publish anywhere, and then if we capture it in Scopus, what we capture is also who they are, that researcher, and what institution they work at. So if it's South Africa, if it's Senegal, if it's Egypt, it's covered, it's captured. And so if it's in Scopus, we can certainly look at that. Yeah.
Time for one more question?
Yes, I'm interested. I noticed that you had the mesh ontology there, but the free format text search, is there a natural language processor, or is that already tied into some other ontology?
Yes, there's a whole natural language processes behind this that works with the fingerprint engine, and I can certainly talk with you more about that offline if you like. Yeah, but it does. I mean, it's not just the fingerprint, but it actually goes through a whole process of natural language processes. Yes.
Well, Dr. Chung, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
In planning this workshop, to be able to include some panel sessions where we could have people who are serving on scientific teams share their experiences. So I will now turn to our first panel discussion that's titled Dialogue from an Interdisciplinary Team Currently Working Together. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Griswold, Professor of Radiology at the Case Center for Imaging Research, and Associate Professor of Physics, Biomedical Engineering, Electrical Engineering, and Computer Science. Dr. Griswold's research focuses primarily on the development of software and hardware for fast MRI imaging methods. Dr. Griswold will be moderating this panel and will take over from this point.
Thank you very much. We're going to just have an open discussion, and if anybody has a question while we're up here talking, just try to raise your hand and interrupt us. We're going to go through and just introduce each other. So, as Jim said, I'm basically a physicist and an engineer, and we'll go through down. So, start with ZR.
My name is Zhenrong Lu, and everybody calls me ZR. I'm a chemist by training. I'm a professor in biomedical engineering. And we try to develop imaging agents for MRI, CT, and we also try to develop all kinds of drug delivery system for therapeutic purpose. And actually, I have several collaborations on the campus because a lot of basic scientists in medical school need some help from a chemist.
Hi, I'm Vikas Gulani, and I'm a clinician scientist. I'm the director of MR, clinical MR at University Hospitals for the System. And my research sits sort of on the translational edge. I do both MR physics kind of work and also clinical MR work. And a lot of my work ends up being in collaboration with biomedical engineering folks in translating engineering developments to the clinical setting.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Brady-Kalnay, and I'm a professor of molecular biology and microbiology. And we've worked on the basic science side of understanding cell adhesion molecules and signal transduction, and then discovered some modifications in those proteins that occur in cancer, and then exploited those discoveries to develop new molecular imaging agents to use for tumor detection.
So we have a relatively crazy diverse group of people as part of this team. And this all started because of an idea that Suzanne had for a grant. So Suzanne, why don't you talk to us a little bit about how we all got together?
So we've worked in pairs over the years for different purposes. And then over a year ago, the National Cancer Institute released a request for proposals that was based upon something called provocative questions. And what had happened is after the 40-year war on cancer, the National Cancer Institute decided to reflect on the progress or lack thereof in certain areas and put out what they called provocative questions. And the provocative question that was most relevant to us was, can you detect tumors when they're 2 to 3 orders of magnitude smaller than currently possible? And they mean clinically. And so we looked at that question. We actually met and we argued about, this is totally impossible. There's no way you can achieve 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. And Mark kept doing the math and he's like, we can't get there. And we kept going over it, and we realized that with the molecular imaging agents that I developed and some tricks with various MRI techniques that Mark was working on, that we might be able to achieve this number. And when we had called
I have to introduce you. So you skipped over a key component of that's important for today. Where did we meet, and how did we get together?
For coffee, and then we were talking about it and drawing on napkins when we met for coffee. So, it's
that was completely by chance.
Yeah.
We ended up in line at coffee by chance.
Yeah, and Vikas was there with us, and Vikas is extremely important in all these conversations because he translates between Mark and I. We don't speak the exact same language. And he, being a clinician scientist, can understand the biology that I'm trying to talk about and then talk physics with Mark. So it's really important in these teams to have people with totally different expertise, and ZR is our chemist, and so whatever we dream up, we have to actually make someday. And so it's really important to have people with different expertise, but that somehow can talk to one another. And sometimes you really do need translation because we're in very, very different fields.
So how long did it go before you got together by accident?
Well, I should say, though, that we were working in pairs, not as the four of us, for different purposes. So when I started working on molecular imaging, I began working with ZR to make these imaging probes. And so we were working together for a few years. And then Mark and I started working together on the basic concept of could I translate my probes into MR, or magnetic resonance imaging.
So just to be clear what Suzanne's talking about when you're talking about molecular imaging, basically the idea is that you're going to make a drug, fundamentally, that's going to bind to something interesting that then we're going to go see visible in an MRI. And so it really requires everything from the chemistry through the molecular biology all the way through to the MRI physics. But even with that drug that you had, we weren't sure whether or not we were going to be able to see anything.
That's right. And so, you work at various levels, maybe from anywhere from the tissue culture dish to an animal model, and then eventually someday into translating it into humans. Well, that any two of us might have bumped into each other for a particular research purpose, but we wouldn't have assembled this team without the provocative question. But because we had a relationship, we could actually come together on a project, because we had about 3 weeks to write that grant. And so we pretty much dropped everything, I think it was over Thanksgiving, and wrote this grant to get it in on time. And you couldn't have done it if you didn't have some relationship with each other, but that there was enough respect amongst us that we could actually, come together and meet a very short deadline.
Yeah, that coffee was critical. My memory of it was that Mark and Sue were in line for coffee, and I happened to be passing by. I was on a clinical day. I was doing interventions, and I was caffeine low. And I, ran into these guys, and Sue I had heard about from many collaborators that I have, but had never actually met. And so they said, we were talking about this grant, and I said, well, I got to run right now, but I could talk at the end of the day. And I think it was a Friday already. And so we finished up the day, and we met for a second coffee at the very end of the day. And that's when these guys laid out, the problem that they'd been thinking about, I guess, for the rest of the day. Yeah. So the coffee was absolutely critical in getting us all together.
And a segment of chance there as well.
Yeah, I was not in the coffee because I'm on the other side of a campus. Actually, I have been working these guys for many years. First with Suzanne for imaging agents, and also I needed help from MRI side. And also once we decided design the agents, sometime I talk to him. He's the guy who may use it. He said, "Oh, this is not going to be useful, and I have to rethink and redesign because as a chemist, I can think about all kinds of structures, but to make it useful, he has the final say. Otherwise, it's not going to work."
And I think that's actually one of the key things that made us successful in the end, is that we had a lot of crazy ideas. Many of them turned out to be bad, either because we couldn't make the agent, or because it wouldn't be clinically useful, or because it wasn't the right biology or the right physics. But because we were able to sit down as a team and discuss and have the right people at the right time, I think that we came up with a reasonable solution. So.
Yeah, and we knew when we submitted the grant, we said they're either going to love it or they're going to hate it, and there's going to be nothing in between, because you either believe that it's possible to achieve those numbers, and the program officer told us, that the most important thing with those provocative questions was to actually answer the question, which nobody apparently does. And so we were very adamant in focused on answering the question that was asked and doing it in a compelling way. And of course, because we had worked together, we had some data to bring to bear on whether that was going to be feasible. And so luckily for us, they liked it, and we were able to get what appears to be the only grant that was awarded in the country on that question.
So things worked out.
Yeah.
So we are just getting started, though, and one of the things that would be useful for the group today is to talk a little bit about, even in those early conversations, how did we work out our differences in terms of how we were going to approach even the grant when we were writing it ourselves? What was did we use a process, or do we just have a fundamental trust that the person who's saying something is right?
I guess that's very important. If we don't have trust on each other, I guess we cannot get together. So that's the key. Because I know you're an expert on MRI. I know if I have questions, I can talk to him about the radiology. And for biology, of course, Suzanne spent a lot of time to study the marker. I guess it's well done. For me, I think just make the right compounds. I guess that's the key. So.
And I do think it's really important that each person committed effort to the project, right? You can't just say you're going to help us out. Like, there has to be real effort committed. The NIH has to view it as not only a true collaboration, but that there's commitment by these individuals to participate in that project.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I came into the project, it was the chemistry and biology of it had been thought about, and I wasn't going to sort of start questioning that at that late a game, and it wasn't even my role. I felt like the question was, how do you get to this 2 to 3-fold improvement in
order of magnitude? Sorry,
sorry, 2 or 3 order of magnitude. I am sorry. Improvement in current tumor detection. We had to start doing the math. Well, okay, we can detect tumors. Our present images are this big, this much resolution. And so once we came up with what we thought was the solution, the job became to write the last aim of the grant, which was going to do that math for the reader. And at that point, I said, okay, I'll take a shot at it. And I'll be honest, I didn't think at that point it was going to get funded. I thought, okay, I'll give it an effort. I'll give it my best shot, and we'll go from there. These are people I respect, and I don't want to poo-poo it at this point, and I just want to give it the absolute best I can. So on Saturday after this, I sat down and wrote out the initial sort of framework of what I thought this aim might look like, and I sent it on to Mark and to Sue, and we got further edits. Mark generated some figures for this and gave some further edits.
On an airplane going to Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And so I think if at that point, if any one of us had been sort of the naysayer and really sort of rained on someone else's parade, I don't think it would have come together. There wasn't enough time.
But something that Vikas did that was incredibly important was he said, well, this is what we actually do clinically. This is, the smallest thing I can see. It's not that I can't see it. It's that I'm just not going to call it a tumor because I'm not 100% sure. So if I had a molecular agent to tell me, yes, this was in fact tumor, I would have called this small thing a tumor. And so that's when the math began to work, was that we realized that it wasn't necessarily a resolution problem. It was a competence problem in seeing in being confident that what you could see was actually a tumor.
And I think that was a key thing, and why I assume that most people are in the room. I don't think that any two of us could have written a grant like this and gotten it. I think, and there's people who are missing. So Dave Wilson is missing, and Andy Sloan is missing, and Chris Flask is missing. There's a whole breadth of expertise that were involved in writing this grant, and I don't think that we could have done it alone or even in pairs. I think that this is an example that could only happen through team science kinds of things. So we haven't. This is new. This is within the last 6 months. We haven't really gotten our first set of papers out. But how are we going to, and how have we all done it in the past, decide things like authorship on papers? So Suzanne's the PI on the grant. How are we going to do that in this case?
Well, I think that, you know, you have to determine first and last authorship based upon either the person that's directing the research or the expert in that individual area. And so it may be that in the case of a technology paper where we're developing new MRI techniques and stuff, it would be crazy for me to be senior author, right? Because I'm not an expert in that area, and it makes sense for Mark or Vikas to do it. And so in the first authorship, it matters really who's driving that work on a hands-on basis. And we have done a lot in the past where we've had co-first authors. ZR and I have done that with some of our papers because there really were two drivers, maybe a chemist and a biologist, that had to come together to make that paper happen. And so I've also done co-senior author in that case as well, where, you know, there really were two drivers to make it happen.
And I think, at least in my experience, one of the ways that we've dealt with this, certainly among us, is to have these discussions up front. So we tend to have these discussions about the authorship position before we even start writing.
Yeah, and you know, Mark and I have published a gazillion papers together. It's a fluid thing in some cases where my student might go to Mark for advice and end up having him as last author, or vice versa. This has happened for both of us. And I think the critical thing for us has been that we're not hung up on this. Like, this is not the end all be all of the science we're trying to do. And everyone will get credit if we publish a whole bunch of papers, and everyone will get last authored papers in due time. And you know, if you get hung up in a knot about a singular paper, you're likely to screw up 10 of them, you know. And so this is something that at least in the MR group has been a joy to work in, because we just don't get crazy about this.
And I will say, though, that we're all fairly senior, and so we're not being judged on, as junior faculty members, on what it was your contribution. We're fairly senior, and we're not hung up on, you know, how many senior author papers we have per se. As long as the grant and the work is moving forward, our focus has been, it's really all about the patients and the science, and it's not about me. And so I think if you have that kind of attitude, everything else will work itself out.
So what advice do you give to young people today about these kinds of things?
I guess, you know, like Suzanne said, the key is get science done. So I have been working with Suzanne for several years. We have several papers together. To me, I think the authorship may depends on how much the contribution we made in the paper. I think I don't really mind that much if she is the senior author for the work. If she does put us as a co-senior author, it's great. And the reason for that, next time I'm a chemist, I don't understand much about biology. I need her help. In that case, my work will be a senior author, and she helped me. So actually, it works very well. I think the key is get the science done, and these things will work out smoothly, because the collaboration is not just one way; it's two-way collaboration. You help her today, next time you need help from her. I guess you know, this something is very important.
Yeah, and I think that this goes back to what Vikas said as well, that if we can get a strong team going, and I have to say CASE is really a unique place, if of all the places I've been, in terms of our ability to collaborate and do new things. And I think if we can get these teams established, then as Vikas said, there's almost an infinite number of papers that we can write, because other places can't assemble a team like this. I've been at Harvard, and never in a million years would the four of us be sitting on the same stage together.
And for junior faculty, I think, too, it's important to realize that, you know, there probably was a day when I first started out that you could sit in your lab and do your own thing and get your grants funded, and and pretty much work completely independently, but I think those days are long gone. And the only grants that appear competitive are grants where you're really bringing a group of individuals with unique expertise together to bear on a particular problem. And it doesn't matter, what type of science you're doing. It's very rare that you could really truly function all by yourself. And so I think when you bring these teams together, your grant is just going to be so much more appealing to the funding agencies because they see that you're surrounded by a network of support.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the key things. And I think that at least I know students in every one of your labs are doing rotations in other people's labs. And I think that we're set up here at CASE to be able to train to do these kinds of interdisciplinary collaborations. If this is the future of science, then we need to start educating people that way. And I think that we're on a path to having a good set of educational systems to do that here.
Yeah, I mean, this bit of the discussion started with what I would tell my student to do, and I think I would tell my student to first and foremost be very honest about what you don't know. And if you don't know something, trying to do a good pretend isn't going to work, not in 2014. You really do have to get that expert in that field because it's just way too competitive out there to try to sort of halfway do it.
So yes, go ahead. I was just going to say, if we have questions, now is probably the time. We've got about 5 minutes left.
The panelist mentioned an episode in which a chemical structure was designed, and Vikas declined that because he thinks it won't apply. Did you have any other such intellectual conflicts which later led to innovations or great ideas? And could you describe these in further detail?
I think our whole team is sitting here because of those incidences happening over and over again.
Yeah, for chemistry design, I don't think that's a problem. We have a lot of discussion. I guess once we get the patent filed, I get all the credits. I'm sorry. He seems okay.
But could you talk about how did you guys have that specific conversation? Or I know we've got infinite number of examples.
Ziar and I have had a few of these. Ziar will occasionally send me an email and say, I have these ideas, and do you have a few minutes to chat? And we'll set up a time and we'll just talk about it. And I'm pretty blunt when I see something that I don't think is going to be viable, because I don't think it's worth wasting Ziar's time if I'm not clean about what what my thinking is clinically. And I guess in some ways I'm sitting up here. I'm not the physicist Mark is. I'm not the chemist Ziar is, and I'm not the biologist that Sue is.
Thank God.
And so I do have to. I have to be very clean about my own thinking and try to provide.
Yes, for chemistry, we can make a lot of kinds of stuff, especially nowadays, nano is pretty hot. And then I get something nano, and then I talk to Vikas, he said, look at me, is that real? So then I have to, when I look at his expression, I go back to my drawing boards to redesign things. So sometimes he may not say things directly, but I can sense that not be a right way. I can go back to my drawing board to redesign things. So that's how we get things going.
Yeah, I think that, so I'm an engineer and a physicist type person, so I'm constantly making new tools, a new hammer. And a lot of times I'll make a hammer that I think is absolutely perfect for some task, and then I'll go talk to somebody like Vikas or Andy Sloan or Jeff Sunshine, who are all clinicians, and they'll say, no, that's useless. I don't need that at all, and we'll throw away a year's work. But I would much rather have that conversation with that person to stop the research or to tweak it now than run with it for many years or get a grant rejected and then lose one shot at the NIH. I think this is the key reason why we have these kind of teams.
And this interaction goes back and forth in different directions. So, when I'm doing when my MR group is doing MR work, my MR ideas, I will run it through Mark from a physics perspective and say, this is the physics I'm thinking about, does it make sense? And it can be the same kind of sanity check that it can be on the clinical side in reverse. It doesn't have to be a one-way street on those kinds of interactions.
I can say another example too, that Vikas and I have worked together on this idea of quantitative MRI for 10 years, and I basically had killed it in my mind about 5 years ago, and he kept it running and kept coming back to it, and I kept saying no, 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 and at the end of the day, we ended up reviving it with a Nature paper last year. And so, it's these kind of teamwork kinds of things where we keep pushing each other one way or another that keeps us on the right track and keeps us moving towards a positive thing. But I think the key thing that I thought was important to emphasize today is this idea of communication, that we have a very open communication. I hope that you've seen that today. And we're honest with each other. I mean, I've screamed at Vikas. I haven't screamed at Suzanne or ZR yet, but Vikas and I have known each other for 20 years, so we can do that. I've known Vikas longer than my wife. So and having the ability to just openly communicate and to tell one another when we're wrong, I think is absolutely one of the most key parts of what we do to keep us on the right path.
And I would say we had a conversation last week where we dreamed up another crazy idea that hopefully will change medicine. And
Maybe.
I told Mark about it like maybe almost a year ago, and he's like, yeah. And
no, it was whatever.
Yeah, and then I said, oh, my translator is here, so I'm going to bring it up again. And so when I get Vikas excited about it, then I know I can convince Mark, and then I think when the three of us actually think, yeah, this is worth doing, then we're on to something. And so it is a sort of checks and balances system about ideas, but then translating them into reality eventually is what we would like to do.
Any other questions from the audience? We are about on time, so if we're... No, Steve's got one.
First, great panel, a great example of how interdisciplinary works well, so thanks for that. I wanted to point out this issue of authorship is really a challenging one because there are different disciplinary norms as to the order of authorship. So in the biomedical sciences, first and last authorship means something. In the social scientists, first authorship is really the only thing that matters. In economics, it's alphabetical no matter what. So this is just not something to be taken lightly. And I think you've resolved it because you're all senior, but it's something that needs to be considered when you're working across these different disciplines and when you're trying to publish these junior authors.
Yeah, we have a mathematician in our group too, and all of her papers are alphabetical, and that took us a while to figure out. But again, I think the key message is to communicate about these things early and often and make sure that everybody is getting a piece of what they need. And in particular, that those junior authors are taken care of. We're all fine. But yeah, that's a great point. All right.
I just had a comment. Can we take the microphone?
Sure.
I just want to say it was great to see you guys up here because when they were talking about this and building teams, the assumption I had was that you almost have to be a senior person to be magnanimous enough to do this. And how you get the young people involved is just by being yourselves, right? I think the people who work under you are probably so lucky that they get to see you with your open-mindedness and your self-respect. Well, I think that's the way you get young people. You show them by example. And what I see a lot in science is people not doing that, not being open-minded, being kind of selfish, not being willing to admit that they don't know or that they're wrong. And I think that the mentoring that you're doing is probably the best thing you can do for the young people. And then you can pass the torch in like 10 years when they get there. So I just wanted to thank you for that, in case no one else did.
It's very kind of you to say. Actually, I know Mark and I, our teams right now are so cool that the young people are we're the lucky ones here. So they're really, really a good set of scientists and a good set of people that get along well, and that makes it very easy to run that group.
And I just have to add, I mean, it's easy to do here in this community. it's easy to take your kids and to teach them that this is the future. There's so many people here, so many professors or groups or institutes around campus that are open to collaboration that it's almost dumb not to take advantage of that. So I don't have any of my students here. So absolutely one of my favorite students in my lab, I try not to play favorites, but one of my favorites is a physicist, a woman who is brilliant, and she's on a training grant actually in cancer pharmacology run by Noah, and she's learning physiology and biology and drug biodistribution, and she's a quantum physicist person. And I think that she is going to be absolutely the most valuable grad student who I have graduating from my lab for a decade, because she'll be able to do anything. And I think that we have, I mean, this is an easy opportunity here to do this kind of thing. And I think that if we're not all doing this, then we're missing something big here.
So one thing I learned from this collaboration, and I also taught my students, I think what I contributed to this is much less than what I learned from these guys. So that's really, really important, because I'm a chemist, I don't know other stuff, but I learned biology. I learned a little bit about MRI and a little bit about how this is going to work.
I know what a chelate is.
I think that's really, really important. I learned a lot more than what I contributed. That's how I feel. So through this kind of collaboration.
That's the truth. All right.
Let's thank our panelists. Introduce our second panel, which will be having a dialogue among these investigators who've worked on various teams who can address some of the challenges of team science that have been listed in the NIH Field Guide to Team Science. So on the far right, our panelists include Dr. Mark Griswold, who we've just met. Next to him is Dr. Joseph Calabrese, who is the Bipolar Disorders Research Chair and Professor of Psychiatry at Case School of Medicine. He's co-director of the Bipolar Disorders Research Center and director of the Mood Disorders Program. And his research activities focus on improving clinical outcomes in underserved populations, children and adolescents, adults with substance abuse disorders, and the U.S. military reserves. Next to him is Dr. Randall Siebel, Professor of Medicine, Epidemiology, and Biostatistics at Case's School of Medicine Metro Health Campus. Dr. Siebel is director of the CWRU Metro Health System Center for Healthcare Research and Policy. He also serves in leadership roles in numerous national and regional health improvement programs, networks, alliances, and task force. His research focuses on the measurement of quality of care and clinical decision-making for chronic conditions, including the use of electronic medical records to enhance quality of care. And lastly, Dr. Richard Rudick, who is Professor of Medicine and the Hazel Pryor Hostetler Chair of Neurology at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. Dr. Rudick also directs the Cleveland Clinic's Mellon Center for Multiple Sclerosis Treatment and Research, and he serves as the Vice Chairman of Research and Development in the Neurological Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Rudick is co-principal investigator of Cleveland's Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative, and his research focuses on the immunology and treatment of multiple sclerosis. And Dr. Rudick will moderate this session.
Thanks very much, Jim. Before we get into some of the challenges associated with the teams that we're going to hear about, I do want to point out one thing that we've implied, but we haven't stated explicitly, and that is being part of a team is fun. And I'm a big proponent of trying to have fun at work. I think we could see this in the last team. They totally enjoy each other. They enjoy learning from each other. I think this, in addition to having major impact in health and making a difference in the world, I want to point out that it's fun to be part of a functioning team. And we're going to move into challenges now, but I don't want to lose the opportunity to say that. I think you could see that by seeing the team that Mark brought up here. So I want to start with Randy. Randy, along with his colleagues in 2005, won a relatively small interdisciplinary presidential research award, which started work into the causes and consequences of dysfunction in the health insurance market. And this led in 2012 to a publication that won a very prestigious Kenneth Arrow Award as the best paper in health economics of the International Health Economics Association. So I'd like to ask Randy to just comment on this experience, and then we'll move to one of his other teams in a minute. But Randy, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Thanks, Rick. Well, I actually wrote some notes to myself about sort of comments on this project. First word I put down was fun. It wasn't the money. There was hardly any money in this grant, but the dean sits here, and I would say we should encourage the rejuvenation of the President's Research Initiative Fund, because it required that there be PIs from at least 2 different schools within the university. And so we did that between medicine and economics in the Weatherhead School, sort of for fun and because we'd worked together as a group within a center that I direct. In any case, that was terrific, and it was fun. I think that from a success point of view, the issues that seemed to me, and Steve's presentation I thought this morning really covered the waterfront in terms of all of the different important things in team research, but respect, I think, is right at the top, and that I could not have done this without my colleagues. They could not have done it without me, and because we respected one another, it was a fun task to go through over 7 years with $150,000 total funding it, which was sort of a joke. But in any case, but because we enjoyed it and because we had the intellectual stimulation along the way, it really was fun. But respect basically drove that. And the second thing was communication. And the exchange that you had here with regard to communication, with Susan saying that Vikas was sort of necessary to talk to you. We basically recruited the economist, the primary economist member of our team from Princeton, and to be a member of our faculty. The chairman of economics and I recruited him, and we basically guaranteed one another, or that we would make sure that if nothing else, that we would eliminate the need for a decoder ring for conversations, for effective conversations among the 3 of us, and that worked.
So maybe you can tell us just a little bit about Better Health Greater Cleveland. Randy is president of Better Health Greater Cleveland. He's led a multi-stakeholder collaboration with 70 primary care practices, 700 physicians, 14 hospitals with chronic medical conditions, and published, as some of you know, a seminal paper on the role of the electronic medical record for improving diabetes care and outcomes, published in New England Journal. So Randy, how do you manage a team this large, a multidisciplinary team this big, different than a 4-person team? What are the challenges there?
So there are challenges. There are enormous challenges, and I think, but what keeps it together, I think, is trust again. Somebody some time ago said trust trumps technology. We have all of this technology surrounding us, but trust trumps technology. And I think that was a very wise saying. We have seen people who, so what we do is we publicly report the achievement and performance of physicians in their practices. And I've seen competing, physicians from competing practices in different systems correct the results that were provided by an unaffiliated system. That kind of trust basically was imperative, and trust with the data and trust that we knew our business, I think, was very important. The other things that I think basically is this is a multi-stakeholder, not just a multidisciplinary collaborative where you've got purchasers, employers, payers, health insurers, providers, and patients all engaged in this process. And there needs to be a commitment to meeting the disparate needs of the different stakeholders in order to keep moving forward.
Could I ask, how do you establish trust in a community like that? That's a really broad, we had a personal relationship. How do you do it across a community of people like that?
It's social capital in part, and leadership, and knowing people. It ultimately ends up being people, and there ends up being sort of a spirit of consensus. Now, consensus means that everyone can agree. That if you've got a consensus-driven decision-making process, then you're basically pivoting on what the position is until you get consensus, until you get agreement across the group. And that includes multiple stakeholders and not just the providers.
Are there one or two quick questions for Randy before we move on? Okay, we'll come back after if we have some time. One of the other rules of teams is if possible, you always want to have a psychiatrist on the team. And so Joe has a unique perspective, I think, on teams. Joe has run an NIMH P20 center on bipolar disorders across the human life cycle, including adolescents and children, adults and older adults. And it became clear that this type of traditional research might not be funded by NIMH going forward. And so a decision was made, I think, by Joe and his team to develop a pilot funding program in order to move this sort of research forward. And Joe's led a team of 35 investigators who've used this pilot mechanism to move forward in this field of bipolar disorders. So I'd like Joe to comment a little on the complexities associated with team science from his perspective, having worked in this bipolar disease area.
So just to refine that a little bit, it started off with 3 psychiatrists studying bipolar disorder. And it morphed into this cohort of now 35 studying the military. So it was a huge change. And for me, it went from being the coordinating PI of a study of one illness to the coordination of 6 PIs studying different aspects of military health. And I think that the thing that comes to mind is anxiety, because, multidisciplinary research, it seems to me, focuses on what you know and what you do well. And then when you get people together, you end up focusing on not just what you know, but you try and learn, what other people have to contribute. So that I think morphing from one type of research to the other is something that provokes a lot of conflict and anxiety. Of these other sites, the other 5 sites were all in different cities as well.
Give us examples of the conflict that you've encountered.
Well, to start off with money management. When I think the more sites you have in a study, the fewer the smaller the amount of money each of the sites get. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I think at the NIMH, it's definitely the case. You know, if you have 3 PIs all at one site, people are, in general, happy with the arrangement. But if you have 6 PIs across different sites, in general, people are going to get less. So money management is one, I think, source of conflict.
What do you do about that?
Well, I don't think there's any easy fix to it, other than staying funded is better than not being funded. I think the richness of a highly disparate interdisciplinary team really moves that forward. The idea of being able to work with people in different areas that are international experts in their particular area is usually what I think motivates people to compromise.
But in terms of budgets, do you find that having some transparency on where the money is a useful approach? In other words, people have a suspicion, if they're suspicious that there's not equitable, I could see where that might contribute a lot of difficulty. How do you deal with the transparency issue?
I don't know. I find that hard to manage. I don't think complete transparency is the key to keep everybody happy. I think reviewing with people whether or not they feel what they're getting is reasonable and appropriate, and then acting on the feedback provided helps. But when the sites are so different and their contributions are so different, it's hard. One site's doing genotyping, and the other site's doing survey methodology. The other site is doing the interviews over the telephone across the.
So I have this experience, and I actually have done both extremes of that. I think when you're dealing with groups that are very similar, that are doing very similar things, I tend to be very transparent among them. That kind of makes them happy. And then if people are doing very disparate things, I tend to separate those out, precisely because you don't want to, somebody might be doing 10 times more work than somebody else, just to keep the conflict from happening where there may not be one.
It's good to know.
Not saying it works all the time.
So are there questions from the audience for Joe about the teams he's been managing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way we manage that is that the project from the beginning was committed to meeting the unmet needs of the military. So we went to the military leadership, the adjutant general, and helped them develop consensus over the areas of the highest unmet need. And then, since it was them that articulated the unmet need, it was easier for the team to act on the feedback provided. It worked out much better. We went to the consumer and helped them figure out where they needed to go, and then they told us where they needed to go.
If I could add, again, I think early and clear communication about what everybody wants out of the collaboration is key. If everybody understands that, I have another project with a key industry partner and another institution in Germany, and the three of us work on a project together. And the guys in Germany have different goals than we do, and the guys at the industrial partner have different goals than either of the other two. but we all understand what each person is getting and what we need out, and we all have a clear understanding of the expectations from everybody. And that's the key of our communication, that we keep going all the time. Everybody has to understand what's going on.
You know, this may partly respond to your question earlier, Mark, but also in response to that. The vision, the common vision, is extremely important. The common mission is extremely important. We say in Better Health Greater Cleveland that we create a safe space for competitors to collaborate. And that's true. And the competitors we're thinking about is us against the clinic, against Kaiser, against other. This is really sort of the competitors here, but only in one stakeholder group, and that's the providers. And then you've got insurance companies, Medical Mutual and United and Anthem and the Medicaid health plans and so forth. And so at some level, you need to make it clear where it is that you intend to be going and try to find common ground where it's a win-win for all of the stakeholders within the collaborative.
So let's move again back to Mark. Mark, you and I are in the process of discussing forming a team. So we're at an earlier stage than the team you demonstrated a little while ago. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that experience has been like? Vikas, if he's still here, is part of that. But we haven't yet fully established the team or written a grant, but we are discussing it. So tell us about that.
So first off, I think it's fun. And I think that, again, the reason that we're working together is because we both have different ends of the spectrum.
You might say something about what it is we're talking about trying to do.
Okay, so we're
because we actually do have a purpose in mind.
Right. So we're developing. It's actually the same thing that I talked about that we published in Nature. This way of doing MRI that may give us very key insights into MS, which is what Rick and his group down the street do. And they're looking at finding a way to, for example, look at drug efficacy to see if these medicines are working, to see if we can see demyelination in the brain, and we might have the answer to that. And part of the fun of we've been talking for probably 8 or 9 months at this point, if I can remember correctly. We've spent most of that time just trying to figure out what each other's saying and what each other wants. I think that we might write a grant this year if we can get around.
I think we're close.
We're getting closer. But as we talked a little bit in the last panel, a big part of what we've spent the time doing is I need to understand what Rick as a clinician is seeing and what is important for his patients, what is he after. And then I have to go back and figure out what can we do on the technical side to answer that question. And then once I have that answer, we have to figure out how to understand each other, to understand what's the answer that I'm giving you, because it's not exactly what you want. And we're working towards a middle ground where we're going to have something useful that may address a very important clinical problem. But I'll keep coming back to it. It's been through a lot of talking and a lot of understanding from each side, and I think that it's at least from my side, I've been trying to sit in the clinician's shoes who's looking at an MS patient and trying to understand what is it that Rick wants, what is it that he wants to see, and this has been a phenomenally interesting thing to do. Again, it's been a lot of fun. It's changed the research that we've done over the last year. I would say dramatically in a couple of cases, just being able to have this interaction again to say, no, this is useful, and no, that's not useful. I think it's been incredibly valuable.
And I have to say, I wasn't entirely sure whether to trust Mark, and then that Nature paper got accepted, and I pretty quickly thought, well, I do trust him after all.
It's just 2 random reviewers out in the world.
Are there other things you wanted to comment on? Because I didn't prepare you for that question.
Well, I think that if I could come back to in general, so we were going to talk about problems at some point, and maybe I can start on that. That I've been doing I'm stuck, so I'm an imager. I'm in the Department of Radiology. I'm a professor of radiology, and I have a PhD after my name. And I've worked in a Department of Radiology for roughly 20 years. And so I'm kind of forced to collaborate across boundaries all the time. And one of the, I keep pounding on this concept of communication. And one of the reasons for that is from a lot of bad experiences that happened early. That if you don't understand what the other person needs from a collaboration, things can get very far along into a very important development, and the last thing you want, if we bring up a Nature paper, if we didn't have a full understanding of what the authorship and what everybody was going to get out of that Nature paper, there would have been a massive fight, and I've been in that experience. At the time of submission of that paper, the paper would have been lower quality, would have had less impact, just because of stupid interpersonal conflicts that happened too late. And so I've been in an experience 20 years ago at this point where we did a study over a period of a year, and my collaborator at the time said to me after a meeting where I had edited the paper and 3 hours of discussing it, he turned to me, and I still can replay this memory in full HD quality. He turns to me and he says, "Well, I'm going to submit this single author because I hear it's good for your career," which meant that I would not appear on the paper at all. And this obviously didn't happen, and but it was a significant conflict that could have been resolved much earlier if we had that discussion. I will bring up a second point that happened because of that. So I was a very junior person at the time, and so was the other person. We always had identified, and it kind of was by luck in this instance, but now it's more determined. We always have an independent third party to adjudicate these kind of conflicts from the beginning. That if it's any two junior people around, there's always an independent third party who can step in and say, this is right, this is wrong, this is what we're going to do, and that's where the trust comes from in that relationship. Again, you've got somebody who you trust to resolve things.
I have an alternative solution to that, and that is to work with people who are not all in the sciences. And in fact, I think that Steve seemed to have a good understanding of what the disciplinary or what the order in the publications would be and the authorship would be. And so I've published with economists, and so when we publish in medicine, or when we publish in economics, Siebel comes before most everything else. So I've had a number of first authored publications, which I didn't deserve from a medicine point of view. And then I have a junior colleague who's really terrific, who basically I feel at liberty to give him a first authorship whenever there was a question of a flip of a coin, etc. And so in fact, this notion of first and last, first and senior, doesn't exist in economics, and I guess probably you understand that as well. We've got a new economist in our midst.
So on our shop, we handled it a little differently. Since we knew we were going to get this large grant, it was going to be 10 years. So before we did anything, put together a policy and procedures that detailed all of this. And then we had a steering committee that meets monthly, because it's just too complicated. It's impossible to expect everything ahead of time.
Yeah, the last thing you want is to end up in having to use those. But the fact that you went through and made a policies and procedures makes it so that you will probably never have to.
You're right. It's a really good point. It was the exercise that brought the team together long before the project took off.
So I guess I'll emphasize a few points because we're getting toward the end. I think that, and we saw this with the team that you demonstrated, I think if each individual team member cares as much or more about the team as about their own self-interest, things tend to work really quite well. I think that can be modeled by the team leader. Giving credit much more than you take credit, I think, is a crucial characteristic of a team leader. Humility, I think, is crucial and goes a long way, because the truth of the matter is there's a whole lot more all of us don't know than do know. And modesty and humility, I think, is crucial. I think that can also be modeled to some degree. And then I think humor goes a long way. We didn't talk about that yet. But I think being able to laugh at yourself and at your team and see the absurdity of some of the circumstances we deal with goes a long way. I don't know how many of you heard Francis Collins sing on the Diane Rehm show the other day, but I think he explained that by saying, under these circumstances, we need some humor. And so I think humor works for teams as well. I think we're getting toward the end. If there were one or two further questions or comments, we could take them. Otherwise, I think we'll move along. Okay, Jim?
So I think we can go ahead and get started. We turn now to the third panel of today's workshop, which is titled Dialogue from the School of Medicine Committee on Appointments, Promotion, and Tenure. And team science certainly presents new challenges in these areas. Our panel consists of two speakers. First, to my immediate right, Dr. Daniel Anker, who is Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Human Resources at Case's School of Medicine. Dr. Anker's office facilitates the faculty appointment and promotion process at the school. And our second panelist is Dr. Robert Salata, who is Professor of Medicine, Epidemiology, and International Health at the School of Medicine. Dr. Salata is also Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Medicine at the University Hospital's Case Medical Center and is Chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases and HIV Medicine. His research interests include the epidemiology and management of healthcare-associated infections and international HIV/AIDS. Dr. Salata is also a former member of the School of Medicine's Committee on Appointments, Promotions, and Tenure, and he is currently chairing a committee whose goal is to update the school's promotion and tenure standards in light of team science. So given their intimate involvement with faculty promotion and tenure, they're in an ideal position to discuss these processes in an age of growing team science. So I will be moderating this panel, and I can also say I'm especially interested in it, given the fact that I'm a tenure-track faculty member. So I think we'll begin really with a basic question. What are the challenges or issues that you see that team science presents for promotion and tenure? Dan?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many friends in the audience. Promotion and tenure processes date back in the medical school probably till at least the 1970s, so far as I know, and in the decades before that as well. And the issue that team science presents is that the documents that we must follow in managing and determining those faculty who go up for promotion and tenure. That is, the documents that state the qualifications and standards were drafted with old style, principal investigator, individual scientist, achievement, and processes in mind. And so while the School of Medicine, with a certain degree of foresight, immediately after the NIH roadmap was published, I think in 2005, amended its promotion and tenure standards in 2006 to include very general references to team science, saying that faculty could be promoted and tenured on that basis. The build-out of the more detailed criteria and meaning of that general statement is yet to be achieved. Bob?
Thank you, Dan.
As you could tell, we've rehearsed
Right.
our song and dance.
I also am pleased to be here, and let me give you a little bit of information about what the process is at this point in time. So there is a significant effort on the part of the School of Medicine Committee on Bylaws to look at the entire package and to make recommendations regarding those changes. We were asked, if you will, as a subcommittee of the Bylaws Committee, to consider this issue, as Dan has already laid out. And we were really charged with considering a process that would be a better fleshed out version of what exists in the current 2006 bylaws, because those are very general statements. I will also say that as one of the former chairs of the CAP committee, that this remains a challenge for committee members. And the metrics and the documentation in order to assess carefully a candidate's consideration for promotion and especially for tenure has been very difficult in the context of their being a team scientist. Let's take as an example people that are really in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, where they're a critical component of multiple of a team or teams. And in that regard, it's been difficult to judge their contributions as opposed to the team leaders or the success of the team. So I think what we were charged in doing is looking at this and thinking about it more critically. This is still a work in progress, so it's fortunate for us to actually be able to present this at this time and get some more feedback from individuals who are in the context of being a team scientist or a team collaborator. Because in the end, it's not just science. This can happen in the educational venue, and this can certainly happen in the service venue as well. We need to really critically think those metrics through as well. So to that end, and with that charge, we formed a subcommittee, 8 members, and that is representative of individuals from multiple disciplines, as you might expect in a team approach. It includes representation from the Cleveland Clinic, from Metro Health Medical Center, from our VA, from CASE, including the basic sciences, and from the clinical departments, including medicine and pediatrics at this point. With that in mind, we've met approximately 5 times to discuss, as has been the case, and I'm sorry I came in a little bit late, but what the heck is team science? How do you define this? And I know that's been a point of discussion throughout the day. And in addition, we did carefully review the current language in the School of Medicine bylaws from 2006, which does allow for consideration of candidates for this, but that's all it says. It's not very full in that regard. But I have to say that when we did our homework, looking at the national scene in terms of what other institutions do in this respect, we were in 2006 very far ahead of the game compared to many other institutions who are just beginning to think about this. Others have moved farther along. There was actually a survey conducted by Northwestern University several years ago where they reached out to P&T committees, deans, and others to find out exactly how they're dealing with it. And as served as the basis for some of our recommendations, which I'll list in a few minutes, we took what we thought were the best of the best. But again, this is still a work in progress. So we reviewed these standards from many other institutions across the nation, and some of them really were enlightening to us in terms of how we did this. Now, if we were about to do this entirely through the bylaws process, this would be an arduous quest, and we would not have something available readily. And in fact, our committee decided that the bylaws are not necessarily the place where the full guidelines or fleshed out version of how we should operate with regard to judging someone in the context of team science should occur. Alternatively, there are guidelines that are in place, and we use those as the basis for really adding to them in a major way. What we would go to candidates, would go to chairs of departments, would go to chairs of CAP committees, et cetera, et cetera. And we hope that, that will not, it will require approval from the faculty council and endorsement by the dean. We plan to take this even all the way to the provost, because as you'll hear, there's going to be new directives given to external reviewers when someone declares themselves to be a team collaborator or a scientist. So if we use the guidelines rather than the bylaws changes as the basis for putting this into place, this can be operative as of the next academic year, and that's what we're really all about. So Dan and I, among other things, are going on a roadshow, so to speak, so that we can present this to multiple groups. Just last week, we presented this to departmental chairs, as well as chairs of committees on appointments, promotions, and tenure. We plan to go to some of the larger committees as well. We will take this to faculty council and a number of other venues, including committees of the basic science chairs and the clinical chairs, et cetera, so that we really get input in a very broad manner. So here are some of the specifics that we've come up with, or the major points that we think are important to emphasize for candidates or for committees in terms of this judgment. One, in the context of this applying to quote, team science, and as I said, we have more work to do and thought that needs to be given to team collaboration in other venues. But to that end, this can apply to tenure track, tenure and non-tenure track candidates whose primary area of excellence, at least at this stage as we're thinking this through, is research. But as I mentioned, we'll be thinking about this in the same manner for the other areas that are applicable. Candidates will be asked, when putting materials together, to identify themselves as an independent scientist, a team scientist, or both. And in fact, I think that's the way things are moving in a considerable fashion. I think one of the points of survival that has occurred at high-level discussions that I've been involved with in terms of chairs of medicine, et cetera, has been one of our points of survival will be more team collaboration in science in that respect.
So if I can, a quick comment. While the medical school CAPT has been attempting to reward and recognize team science contributions for the past 7 years, they've been hampered by the fact that even at the outset of reviewing a file, the candidate isn't identified as a team scientist or not. This new requirement that research-focused faculty going up for promotion would have to identify themselves, I say would have to. It's a benefit to have them clearly identified as team science or combination scientists, because then certain other requirements will kick in.
So very importantly, and to be stressed to all the groups that we're reaching out to, is the following: that the team scientist does represent an individual whose the greater portion of their research accomplishments, publications, grants, and national reputation rest on original, creative, indispensable, and unique contributions within a group or groups of other scientists. So that has to be really a point of emphasis as such a candidate comes through. Now, how are we going to do this? There will be new supplementary information or materials asked of these individuals, such as their personal statements will have to clearly indicate that not only they want to be considered as a team scientist or both, but why? What are the unique contributions? What are the indispensable contributions that they brought? We will ask those candidates, furthermore, to annotate their publications and the grants that they're involved with, again, to indicate very precisely what their role and contribution is. Furthermore, we will ask for letters from collaborators or mentors or colleagues involved in the team science effort. Two of those really should be in that context. And they should address clearly what role this candidate or individual played in terms of the contributions. And very importantly, external reviewers, which we know is most important in terms, one of the most important documents in terms of how the committee deliberates. They will be charged also with considering this candidate in the team science context. And we will ask the candidates themselves to carefully choose their external reviewers with this in mind. In fact, it may be so that some of these external reviewers really will be incredible team scientists themselves. We still are looking for arm's length in terms of how people are viewed, but those are going to be some of the materials that will be critically important in terms of how we move forward. So these documents and supplementary material that we propose have been already written into these guidelines in draft form. And as I said, there is much work for us to do as we take this forward and discuss this with multiple groups and individuals to get their endorsement as we move forward. Dan, do you want to add?
So to echo a couple of important points, what we've observed in being part of CAPT reviews of team candidates is that the committee has been hampered not simply by the lack of an identification as a team scientist, but a lack of materials within the file that spell out in detail what individual contributions that candidate has made to the team. By asking candidates to annotate their CVs, listings of publications and grants with an eye toward illuminating their contribution so that the CAPT and later reviewers can see what their contributions have been, we think those candidates are going to be far better off. Similarly, we're demanding or requiring that candidates think about the perspective that their external referees and colleague referees will have regarding team science as they identify those external referees and colleagues for reference writing purposes. All in all, what the committee has decided to do is not fiddle with the standards as they're currently expressed in the qualifications and standards document, but instead require candidates to think through and document, we hope, in far better fashion than they have in the past, the materials that the committee, the dean, and the provost see in order to better appreciate their team science.
So one other comment that the committee struggled with mightily is the whole issue of tenure. And I think that for promotion, often consideration for a candidate as a team scientist is a bit easier to fathom and to understand and to reconcile. But this will really set forth a new paradigm, I think, in terms of how the committee has worked. And I could tell you, as being, as I said before, a former chair, that that's not been the mindset. So we really have to do a major re-education here as part of this process, and we plan to do that. I would also say that several members of this subcommittee have been chairs of the CAP committee at the School of Medicine before, so we have their experience and their frustration in the past in trying to move through these kinds of materials.
So are there the activities that you mentioned, those steps, are these pretty much the types of approach that other institutions are using? Has there been much of a dialogue across institutions about how to handle these issues?
So in the cases where I think it's been most successful, in those institutions where we looked at this carefully, these are the kinds of steps, not necessarily all of them, that have been put into place. And so what we tried to do is incorporate what we thought were the best of the best approaches that other institutions have made. So in general, the answer is yes, but not in all circumstances.
Specifically, we discovered that most institutions who had thought seriously about this had created better documentation requirements, and we took the best of the documentation requirements from across the board. I don't think I saw a single institution that had provided a workable definition of a team scientist, but we felt it was impossible to have our faculty understand who we are aiming our changes at without providing such a definition. And I'm almost certain that we'll be amending and refining that definition in response to what all of you say and your colleagues and what the candidates and nominating chairs say in the year or even years ahead. This is still a work in progress.
What are the mechanisms for faculty here, for instance, to be able to provide feedback in this area?
Well, one is at forum or venues like this, where we'll be soliciting ideas. I think that this can always be sent directly to Dan, and we'll so invite this. When we get to the point, and I haven't even discussed this with Dan yet, where we present this to clinical counsel and the dean, we're not even at that point yet, but we'll be soon doing that. We can actually send out a broad email blast and invite comments as well, with some of this packaged in it, so that a broader array of faculty can reflect on this and send comments along accordingly.
A week from today, we will be presenting to the Faculty Council, which has a representative from each department, and we will be urging the council representatives to communicate the details with their rank and file faculty. We're going to leadership through the clinical chairs, the basic science chairs, the Faculty Council itself, and we hope to meet with the provost so that a year from now, when she and he, Lynn Singer and Bud Bazelak, see the promotion files, we'll have sensitized them to the team science issues.
And we hope in the end that this will set a precedent for other schools in the college throughout the university. As we've done a lot of work in this regard, it will obviously be customized based upon their own metrics for success in those areas. But I think, and I know that some of them do this better than the School of Medicine right now, but that's something not terribly so. But I don't think they have guidelines like we're developing. And we hope that this will really be a springboard for them to think more carefully about it as well.
Yes.
In our discussion today, and usually when we discuss this in the KL2 Scholar Program, we talk about and think about at least 3 different kinds of multidisciplinary research. And you're talking about team science, using a single word, and the question is, are there opportunities to make sure that these variations are reasonably reflected? So multidisciplinary research in which the individual is representing their own discipline with a bunch of other people is probably the easiest one to figure out what are the unique contributions this person is making because they're representing their own sort of discipline. Interdisciplinary research, where you're really beginning to mix and match methods. You're still sort of in your discipline, but you're also much more interactive with the other folks. May be a little more difficult. And the transdisciplinary, where you're really trying to really trying to think out of the box. You're trying to figure things out that we think we don't know how to do terribly well, and we're trying to come up with new ways. That may be easier, it may be more challenging. But I guess the question is, have those sorts of considerations, are they already on the table, or is that something that is an opportunity for future discussion?
So just starting, you're absolutely right. This is a much more complex issue than the way it's being presented right now. It was easiest for us to start with the research arena and team science in that regard, but it encompasses much more activity, as you just laid out, and we do have plans to discuss this further we have not come to that point yet. I think what we wanted to do is get something moving. And I think because in the School of Medicine, this is more applicable to most of the candidates that are coming up in this regard. But if you start going across, and especially in a transdisciplinary way, as you indicate, I think we need to give that some thought as well. And that will involve other folks and their input additionally. But this is where we started, and you could probably understand and appreciate why we did so.
I think in the first and second year that this is rolled out that we're going to learn a lot from the individual candidates, because they should be highly motivated to provide a description of, in detail, of their contributions and characterize them even if they don't fall into the simple-minded categories of team science that we've so far formulated. And I know that I have a lot to learn about the nuances of transdisciplinary as opposed to multidisciplinary, et cetera. And the committee as a whole, referring to the CAPT, needs to think through, perhaps on a case-by-case basis, as those candidates come forward, how they will weight and value the contributions that the different types of team scientists make. Promotion isn't based on any single grant or any single publication, or perhaps not even any single project. Candidates will need to present an ongoing, sustained sequence of contributions, and the degree to which those contributions are on a clear single path or have only a family resemblance but are spread out on multiple paths, we need to see as we go forward. But I know that the promotions committee starts from the presumption we want to make this promotion, we want to find the reasons that this candidate deserves promotion, and that's consistently for decades been their approach. They're not going to shut off any individual candidate because they don't fit into clearly defined pigeonholes that we've started out with.
There's another question, but I would only say that I don't want to necessarily see this committee continue in perpetuity, but I think on the other hand, it will be a learning process, and I think we really need, your point is a very critical one. We've begun to think about that, but wanted to start somewhere to get it going. We know this is a work in progress and it will evolve, and I think that's an important point of this. Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Being an old guy, I've been around the university for a while. We used to call, there was a period maybe 15 years ago where we talked about one university. And it seems to me that we're still talking about team science as a hurdle, that it's creating some sort of that what we're trying to do is establish some standards that are going to permit, not celebrate, but permit people to be promoted within the university, within the one university. I'm just wondering what other ways in which that the university might promote team science as something that we value in a very positive way. The Presidential Research Initiative grants that were out during Dr. Hundert's era for a few years was, I thought, a wonderful example. Required that there were co-PIs at different schools, not just departments within the medical school. And the other thing is the notion, perhaps, of having joint appointments as opposed to primary and secondary appointments, perhaps across schools. I understand that these are big barriers, but I think this is a big issue.
Well, even more recently than President Hundert's years, the strategic plan from 5 years ago encouraged alliances. I remember that word having a lot of currency. And we may have presented the team science requirements as extra work for candidates, but the truth is the committee, as it's reviewing candidates, won't look at it as extra work. They, I'm sure, will see better documentation and an ability to appreciate the work that candidates have done. Moreover, I would be willing to place a small wager that more than half of the candidates coming forward who are research-focused will identify themselves as team scientists with an ever-increasing proportion, so that I think before too long that will be the template for all research-focused faculty promotions?
I think it's only been viewed as a challenge because we haven't really had something in the documentation, which, as you know, is the only thing the committee has to work with and operate with in order to make, I think, better judgments about the candidacy of that person. I agree with you. I think this is a great opportunity, and we should be celebrating. And in fact, many of us are convinced that this is the wave of the future. That said, if you look at the new strategic plan for the university, several folks may have been involved in that process. It is still very much focused on interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary activity throughout the entire university. So I think it's consistent with that. I would anticipate that when Dan and I take this to the provost, that this will resonate well. And I see that this will not be a major challenge or a problem. I think it really is our opportunity to provide the committee with a better basis for judgment. That's what it is. Not that it's a problem or a challenge, and I think that's the way it's going and it should go. But on the other hand, we haven't had much to hang our hat on at this point in time, and it's made it challenging for the committee in terms of their judgment. So I think that's more the issue in my view.
I want to echo Randy's point. I'm not sure he meant that the challenges for the committee or for the P&T reviewers, the challenge is for the people going up for tenure. So it seems that this requirement to annotate their contributions through their vita is an added burden. So it's something that they need to overcome to document their value and their worth. And while I applaud your attempt to at least put it on the table, you are separating them and making them do something different that is not a requirement for people who are following the traditional path. With that said, I think if you look at what some journals are doing now and requirements for author contributions being spelled out, that might be helpful, because I know that it would be a hell of a lot of work to go through and annotate one's vita with regard to spelling out their contributions in a very subjective approach as well. But if you look at what journals are requiring with regard to author contributions, you might have a template that could be followed and that would make this a little bit easier for the people going up.
We don't mean to overburden the candidates, and we are sympathetic to what you're saying, but you can never assume that the 16 members of the CAPT are familiar with the idiosyncrasies of any particular discipline or journal's authorship conventions. And it's incumbent on the candidate to anticipate where the committee may be ignorant and help fill in the blank. And the incentive is there, so that if it's a burden, I hope that there's a reward that comes with that at the end of the line.
I think that can be considered, and certainly anyone up front saying that they're going up for as a team scientist alone or in combination with being both an independent and team scientist, we would ask them to do the same thing. Whether we ask those going up for independence as an independent scientist, I think it's worth a point of discussion, absolutely.
I think that's a terrific suggestion. We stopped with our, at least, well, I stopped in thinking about individual scientists once they checked that box, and didn't think about any subsequent implications for their files. But we'll have the committee think it through. That's a great idea. Well, and it also levels the field for the individual and the team scientist.
So I think it's a wonderful idea to have some criteria here, and I do want to point out that when the director of NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, was here, and some of the KL2 scholars met with him, every single one of them, he asked, how do you feel about your chances for promotion and tenure? Because they were all engaging in some measure of team science. And the message came loud and clear from him that the universities need to keep up with the way that science is actually being done these days. And I think a lot of this symposium has specified that that's the way it's going. We've got the guts now to tackle big problems, and everybody needs some credit for that. I do have to point out, though, that when Chris Austin was here, he was particularly concerned that it does go university-wide, because he believes that people from the medical school should be collaborating with people in physics and people in engineering and people in nursing and people in dental. And if they aren't on the same playing field in terms of the value that's placed on what they do, the collaborations will, by their very nature, be uneven, and the level of trust and contribution may not be even. So I applaud your intent to go to the provost and at least offer what you've done as a roadmap. This is not some renegade group of folks trying to get people tenured. This is, I think, what the NIH sees as the real future, and we have to figure out how to do it and how to reward it. I would also offer, as a feedback mechanism, so for the new building, we have a website that has a feedback, give feedback, forget the exact words, but you can push a button and send an email. And I'd be happy to offer that when you're ready. I mean, I've heard that you're not quite ready, you want to do another loop or two, but we could certainly put something up on the School of Medicine website and allow people to comment on it, and we might get some good feedback that way.
I just wanted to say that I think it's fabulous that you're doing this, because it's giving individuals an opportunity to shine and let them tell their story, right, about how they're collaborating with people. And it's a great first step. You have to start somewhere. It's very courageous to make a step when things have always been going the way they were. You're doing something courageous, and I think that's great, and it's giving people an opportunity. Of course, people in the room work in groups, and they know the benefits that are untold of working in groups, and what you gain from it, like the panelists said, is more than you put into it. So I applaud you, and please continue to push that agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Aside from promotion, are you doing this for just normal performance assessments, practices, maybe some challenges folks in that review?
Well, our committee had not thought about this initiative from that point of view. We hope that department chairs and division chiefs appreciate the broad range of contributions that faculty make, whether individual, team, or otherwise. But as you say it out loud, it's a very good suggestion.
I think inherent in the discussions we'll have with the departmental caps and the department chairs, et cetera, will be that very discussion. And whether they want to apply some of these same things, perhaps not to the same extent, extreme, to the mid-term review for tenure, et cetera, I think that's a very good idea.
I'm not a case of police, so I know you're not going to do my performance. but I think even where I am at is when I turn in my AAR every year, I need to do some type of substantiation so that we can do that. Sure. I think that we want to be measured on it.
That's a great idea.
It would probably be a whole lot easier when you go to do your promotion packet if you've been annotating your grants and your papers all along, so that your chair or whoever does your performance review understands your contribution. And then it might not be such a burden when you have to put your promotion packet together.
Maybe start now. I don't know how many people that you want to go back and grandfather them all in. That would be quite a job. Start somewhere.
Yeah, our goal, if we move this along as we're planning is to have this operative by the next academic year.
Other questions from the audience? Dan, were you going to say something? Oh. So it sounds like I need to sharpen my annotation skills. Are there, you know, for the person
There must be literature on that too.
You know, what can I start tomorrow to do, you know, in practical terms to start documenting this? And you've given some, you know, specific strategies. Are there other things that come to mind that you wanted to share?
Well, one piece of advice that I give all candidates is to remind them that to be promoted to senior level rank requires a national reputation for your research work. This may be an extra burden for team scientists who, it's a step, or well, a thought process and then an associated series of actions. Candidates will need to show that there is a certain level of recognition for the work that they have done within the team. And typically, that recognition takes the form of invitations to serve for editorships, to deliver papers at professional societies meetings, and invitations to be visiting professor, et cetera, service on grant panels, and so on. All the usual indicators of national status and reputation. And faculty need to begin strategizing about how to do that in year one so that in year 4 and 6 and 8 they have a series of, if annotated or not, but entries on their CV that show they have received those invitations, et cetera.
So this will also require, we hope, in the context of all this discussion in the context of the teams. And for the team leaders to recognize that very element of what you're talking about so that younger faculty can have those opportunities, which will provide those outcomes or metrics that will be important later.
And we know those don't, you know, they don't manufacture themselves, and sometimes junior faculty can't themselves create them. They need mentorship. Traditionally, we've looked to the department chair or the PI to provide mentorship for junior faculty, but it may be that a team-based approach to mentorship and a research team base is the way of the future.
Dan, I know your shop runs several workshops, seminars for helping faculty with you know, developing CVs, all this sort of stuff. Do you envision this sort of assistance down the line for this area?
Well, absolutely. The Faculty Affairs Office presents something that I think of as maximizing your chances for promotion and tenure. Team science will certainly play a key or central role in presentations this year and into the future. I think we need to educate not simply the junior level faculty seeking promotion or associate professors who also seek promotion on this basis, but the department chairs and the senior research faculty in the School of Medicine about the necessity to pitch in as part of the team in this role.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, well, please join me in thanking Bob and Dan for joining us today. Thank you.